Hey everyone. Welcome back to Gringotts Hub. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry used the Potter-Black-Gryffindor rings to legally dissolve every Pureblood family at once? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Weight of 3 Rings. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Harry stood at the edge of the Hogwarts grounds with his hands in his pockets and his collar turned up against the wet, watching the last of the reconstruction crews float a new section of wall into place on the castle's eastern face. The stone was too clean. You could see where the old walls ended and the new began, a pale seam running jagged through the dark granite like a scar that hadn't learned to blend in yet. He'd been back every day this week. Nobody asked him to. Nobody asked him not to either, which was its own kind of problem. People saw him and either froze up or started thanking him, and both options made his stomach turn. He'd taken to coming early, before the crews arrived, walking the grounds in the grey pre-dawn while the castle was still quiet enough to feel like it used to. It didn't feel like it used to. A crack of apparition behind him. He didn't turn around. "You're getting predictable," Hermione said, stepping up beside him. She'd tied her hair back and was wearing muggle clothes under an open robe, jeans, boots, a jumper that looked like it belonged to Ron. "I checked Grimmauld Place first, but Creature said you'd already left." "Creature talks to you now. Creature tolerates me now. There's a difference." She looked at the castle. "The East Tower looks good. Looks wrong. It looks new." "That's not the same thing." Harry shrugged. She was right, probably. She usually was. But he'd watched people die against those walls 2 months ago, and the fresh stone felt like someone had gone over a grave with a coat of paint. "You didn't come here to talk about architecture," he said. "No." She pulled a folded copy of the Daily Prophet from inside her robe and held it out. Page 3. He took it. The front page was more reconstruction coverage, Minister Shacklebolt announcing new funding for Hogsmeade businesses, a photograph of witches and wizards hauling rubble out of a collapsed shop. Harry flipped to page 3 and felt something cold settle in the pit of his stomach. The headline read, "Malfoy Patriarch cleared of all charges, Wizengamot votes 7-5 in closed session." Below it, a photograph of Lucius Malfoy descending the steps of the ministry, looking thin and pale but immaculately dressed, his silver blonde hair pulled back, his expression carefully neutral. Narcissa was beside him, her hand on his arm. Draco was a step behind, staring at the ground. Harry read the first 3 paragraphs. Key testimony sealed. Extenuating circumstances. A handful of Wizengamot members, names he didn't recognize, had argued successfully that Malfoy's cooperation in the final days of the war constituted sufficient grounds for leniency. The vote had been closed to the public. "Cooperation," Harry said. "Narcissa lied to Voldemort for you. That was the lever they used. They argued the whole family turned coat. Narcissa did. Lucius sat in his own drawing room while Hermione Granger was tortured on his floor. He looked at her. You remember that, right? Because apparently the Wizengamot doesn't." Something flickered across her face. She rubbed her left forearm, an unconscious gesture she developed in the weeks after the war, tracing the place where Bellatrix's knife had cut. She caught herself doing it and stopped. "I remember," she said quietly. Harry folded the paper and handed it back. "Who voted?" "That's the thing. Closed session means the individual votes aren't public record. But I've been asking around, and at least 3 of the 7 who voted to acquit are from old families, Selwyn, Rowell, and someone from the Flint line. Families that should be under investigation themselves. So Death Eaters voted to free a Death Eater. Former Death Eaters. Technically none of them were convicted. Technically. They stood there for a moment, watching the rain. "There's something else," Hermione said. "I submitted the Muggleborn rights proposal to the Wizengamot Legislative Committee last week. The one Kingsley said he'd support. And tabled indefinitely. The committee chair, Amos Greengrass, Cyrus's brother, said the current political climate wasn't conducive to sweeping social reform. He used those exact words. Sweeping social reform. As if asking for Muggleborns to have equal inheritance rights is radical. Harry almost laughed. 2 months. It took them 2 months to go right back to how it was. Not exactly how it was. It's quieter now. More polite. But the same people are pulling the same levers. She paused. Harry, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to go to Gringotts. She blinked. What? There's been a letter sitting on my kitchen table for 2 weeks. From the goblins. Something about an inheritance review. I've been ignoring it. Why? Because I've been ignoring everything. He looked at her, and some of the distance left his eyes. But I think it's time to stop doing that. Diagon Alley was trying very hard to look alive. Bunting hung from shop fronts, red and gold, because apparently the whole wizarding world had become honorary Gryffindors overnight. Half the stores were open, the other half still bore scorch marks and shattered windows. Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor was a hollow shell. Ollivander's had reopened, but the old man himself rarely appeared behind the counter anymore, and his new assistant, a nervous young witch from Beauxbatons, couldn't match a wand to a wizard without consulting 3 reference books. Harry walked with Hermione through the mid-morning crowd, and people parted for him without being asked. Some nodded. Some stared. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed, and the mother shushed her and pulled her away as if Harry were something dangerous. He supposed he was, in a way. The boy who lived twice. The man who killed Voldemort. There were already 3 unauthorized biographies in print, and Rita Skeeter was apparently working on a 4th. He hadn't read any of them. They passed Weasley's Wizard Wheezes and Harry slowed. The shop was open, the display window stocked with skiving snack boxes and extendable ears, but the usual chaos was missing. No enchanted fireworks spiraling across the ceiling. No trick sweets offered to passers-by. George was running the place alone now, and you could feel the absence of the other half like a missing tooth. The front window had been repaired recently. Harry could see the faint shimmer of fresh glass where the old pane had been. When did this happen? He asked. Hermione hesitated. 3 nights ago. Someone threw a curse through the window around 2 in the morning. George was sleeping upstairs. Harry stopped walking. What kind of curse? Blasting hex. Heavy one. Took out the entire front display and most of the shelving behind it. If George had been downstairs, was anyone caught? No. The Aurors investigated. Said it was probably random vandalism. War resentment. War resentment, Harry repeated. That's what they said. Against a joke shop. Against a Weasley. Against a family that stood with you. Hermione's voice was careful, the way it got when she was trying not to say something she thought might set him off. Ron's furious. He wanted to go after, well, he doesn't know who to go after, which is the problem. But he's spending most of his time at the shop now, helping George rebuild. Harry looked at the repaired window for another long moment. Then he turned and kept walking toward Gringotts. The bank loomed at the end of the alley, white marble and bronze doors and the eternal scowl of goblin architecture. Harry hadn't been back since he'd broken into the place, ridden a dragon through the roof, and crashed out through the underground lake. The goblins, as a species, were not the forgiving type. Are you sure about this? Hermione asked as they climbed the steps. Not even slightly. That's reassuring. The doors opened as they approached, not by magic, but by the hands of 2 goblin guards who watched Harry with expressions that could have curdled milk. He nodded to them. They did not nod back. The interior of Gringotts had been fully repaired, which meant the goblins had managed in weeks what the wizarding world was still struggling to accomplish in months. The marble floors gleamed. The chandeliers burned with cold white light. Goblins moved behind the long counters with their usual brisk efficiency, and the few witches and wizards conducting business kept their voices low, as if they were in a cathedral. Harry walked to the nearest open counter. The goblin behind it looked up, saw who it was, and his face did something complicated. "Mr. Potter. I received a letter about an inheritance review. I'd like to speak with whoever sent it." The goblin's eyes moved to Hermione, then back to Harry. "You bring a guest into the bank you violated. I bring a friend into a place of business. And I believe we covered the violation with the reparations agreement 3 weeks ago. 12,000 galleons, if I recall." "You recall correctly." The goblin's long fingers drummed on the counter. "The letter was sent by Senior Account Manager Ragnarok. I will see if he is available." He paused. "He will be available. Wait here." The goblin disappeared through a door behind the counter. Harry and Hermione stood in the lobby, and he could feel eyes on them, goblin and human alike. 12,000 galleons. Hermione whispered. It seemed fair. We did destroy a significant portion of their underground infrastructure. We also freed a tortured dragon. I don't think the goblins see it that way. A different goblin appeared, older, dressed in a dark suit cut in the goblin style, with a face like a hatchet that had seen extensive use. He carried a leather case under one arm and regarded Harry with an expression that managed to be simultaneously hostile and professional. "Lord Potter," the goblin said. "Follow me." Harry caught the word. "Lord." "That," Ragnarok said, already walking, "is precisely what we need to discuss." The office was deep underground, past 3 security checkpoints and a corridor lined with what Harry was fairly certain were concealed weapons. Ragnarok's workspace was surprisingly simple, a stone desk, 2 chairs, and walls lined with filing cabinets that stretched to the ceiling. No art. No decoration. Goblins didn't believe in ornamentation that couldn't also function as a blade. Ragnarok sat behind the desk and placed the leather case in front of him. Harry and Hermione took the chairs opposite. "I will be direct," Ragnarok said. "I do not like you, Mr. Potter. You broke into this bank, stole from a high-security vault, destroyed property valued at over 60,000 galleons, and freed a security beast that took us 40 years to train." "Understood," Harry said. "However, you also killed the Dark Lord who was blackmailing several of our senior partners, which freed up a considerable amount of institutional capital. Business is business." He opened the leather case. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were 3 rings. Harry leaned forward. The first ring he recognized, or rather, he recognized the crest. A shield bearing a griffin rampant, with a letter P worked into the design. The Potter ring. It was gold, simple, old. It looked like something that had been worn by a lot of hands over a lot of years. The second ring was silver and onyx, heavier, more elaborate. The black family crest, 2 greyhounds flanking a shield with a chevron and a short sword. Harry had seen it on tapestries in Grimmauld Place, on Sirius's old belongings, engraved into the silverware that creature polished obsessively. The third ring made his breath catch. It was larger than the other 2, forged from a metal that seemed to shift between gold and deep red depending on how the light hit it. The crest was a lion, not the stylized Hogwarts lion, but something older, rawer, less refined. A lion with its jaws open and one paw raised, carved with a level of detail that shouldn't have been possible on a ring that size. Beneath the lion, 2 words in Latin that Harry couldn't read. "Godric Gryffindor's ring," he said. "The lordship ring of House Gryffindor," Ragnarok corrected. One of 4 created when the Hogwarts founders established the original Wizengamot in the year 993. The Gryffindor line passed through several families over the centuries before arriving at the Potters through marriage in 1342. The claim has been dormant since your grandfather Fleamont Potter chose not to activate it. Your father never knew about it, he died too young to receive his full inheritance review. And the Black Ring? Sirius Black named you his heir in his will. As the last male heir acknowledged by the family magic, his bequest carries full legal weight. The Black Lordship transferred to you upon his death in 1996, though it has remained unclaimed. Ragnar's dark eyes fixed on Harry. You are, Mr. Potter, the holder of 3 lordship claims. This has not happened in over 400 years. Hermione had gone very still beside him. Harry could practically hear her brain working. What does that mean, practically? Harry asked. Practically, it means you are obscenely wealthy, as you already knew. The combined Potter, Black, and Gryffindor vaults contain approximately 2.3 million galleons in liquid assets, plus properties, artifacts, and investments. Ragnar's tone was dry. But you are not here because of gold. The gold is the least interesting part of what you now hold. He reached into the case and produced a sheaf of parchment, old and thick, the edges sealed with wax that bore the marks of all 4 Hogwarts founders. This is a copy, the original is in our deepest vault, of the Wizengamot Charter of 993. When the founders established the governing body of Wizarding Britain, they did so through a system of oaths. Every family that was granted a seat swore fealty to the founding houses. Not to the individuals, to the houses. The magically binding commitments were tied to the house rings. He tapped the 3 rings in their velvet bed. These rings are not jewelry, Mr. Potter. They are instruments of legal and magical authority. They are, in the most literal sense, the keys to Wizarding Britain's power structure. I've read references to the original charter, Hermione said, leaning forward. But the Ministry's position has always been that the founder oaths are ceremonial. Historical relics with no binding force. Ragnar looked at her with something that might have been respect, if goblins had respect for humans. The Ministry's position is wrong. The Ministry's position has always been wrong. The oaths were sealed with blood and magic. They do not expire. They do not become ceremonial simply because wizards find them inconvenient. He turned back to Harry. Every pureblood family that holds a Wizengamot seat, every family that traces its political authority to the original charter, is bound by those oaths. Oaths of loyalty. Oaths of honorable conduct. Oaths against the practice of magic that corrupts the soul. The room was very quiet. Harry could hear his own heartbeat. And if those oaths were broken, he asked. Ragnar's smile was not pleasant. Clause 17 of the original charter. The dissolution of dishonored houses. If a lord of 3 or more founding seats determines that sworn families have broken their oaths, through dark allegiance, blood war, or acts that corrupt the soul, he may invoke the clause and dissolve those families' claims. Their seats. Their titles. Their vault entailments. Their ancestral property protections. Their family magic. Dissolve, Harry said. Not punish. Dissolve. Everything that makes a pureblood family is built on the charter. The titles, the inherited seats, the legal protections, the ancestral wards, all of it flows from the original oaths. Clause 17 doesn't imprison anyone or hurt anyone physically. It simply removes the foundation. Everything built on top of it collapses. Harry sat back in his chair. He stared at the 3 rings. You're saying, he said slowly, that if I put on those rings and invoke this clause, I could strip every Death Eater family, every family that served Voldemort, that practiced dark magic, that broke their oaths, of everything. Not just Death Eater families. Any family that can be demonstrated to have broken the original oaths at any point. The magic doesn't distinguish between degrees. An oath is kept or it is broken. That would be. Hermione trailed off, doing the math in her head. That would be almost every old pureblood family in Britain. The Malfoys, obviously. The Lestranges. The Knotts. The Crabs. The Rolls. The Selwyns. The Averys. The Yaxleys. She paused. Potentially dozens of families. 28, Ragnar said. By our records, 28 families currently hold charter seats that are vulnerable to a Clause 17 dissolution. Some served the Dark Lord directly. Others harbored, funded, or politically enabled those who did. The oaths make no distinction between the hand that holds the wand and the hand that holds the purse strings. Harry looked at the rings again. The Gryffindor ring seemed to catch the light even though there was no direct light source in the underground office. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Gringotts doesn't do favors." "Gringotts does business," Ragnarok said. "And a significant restructuring of wizarding wealth would generate a considerable volume of transactions, each of which would carry our standard processing fees." His smile widened. "We are not altruistic, Mr. Potter. But our interests occasionally align with those of our clients. You want the fees. We want stability. The current system is unstable. The same families that funded the Dark Lord's war are already reasserting control over the Wizengamot. They will continue to do so. And when the next Dark Wizard rises, and there is always a next one, Gringotts will again find itself caught between cooperation and conquest." Ragnarok closed the leather case, leaving the rings on display. "We would prefer a different arrangement." Harry stood. He looked down at the 3 rings for a long time. "I need to think about this," he said. "Of course. But Mr. Potter, the rings must be claimed voluntarily. No one can force them onto your hand, and no one can take them once they're there. The choice is yours." Ragnarok paused. "It has always been yours." "That is rather the point." They went to Grimmauld Place. It was still grim, still dark, still vaguely hostile in the way that a house saturated with generations of Black family paranoia tended to be. But Harry had been living there since the battle, and Creature had made an effort. The drawing room was clean, the worst of the dark artifacts had been removed, and there was actual food in the kitchen. They sat at the long table in the basement kitchen, and Creature brought tea without being asked. He set the cups down with exaggerated care, shot Hermione a look of practiced disdain, and retreated to his cupboard. "He's warming up to me," Hermione said. "He set your cup slightly further from the edge than last time. That's practically an embrace." She wrapped her hands around the tea and stared into it. Harry could see her processing, the way her eyes moved slightly, the way she chewed the inside of her cheek. She was building something in her head, and he knew from years of experience to let her build it before asking questions. "Clause 17, she said finally. "I need to see the original charter. The copy Ragnarok showed us wasn't complete. I could tell from the page numbering that sections were missing." "You noticed the page numbering?" "Obviously." She pulled a notebook from her bag, she'd never stopped carrying one, and began writing. "The legal implications are staggering. If the oaths are genuinely binding, and goblin-certified magical contracts are historically more reliable than ministry ones, then the entire structure of pureblood political power rests on a foundation that most of them have violated. It's not even a question of interpretation. Serving Voldemort is a textbook violation of every oath category Ragnarok described. So it would work. It would work if the magic recognizes your claim. 3 lordships from founding houses, that's the threshold. You have the Potter and Black claims through blood and bequest, and the Gryffindor claim through the Potter line." She looked up from her notes. "Harry, do you understand what this would actually do? Strip them of their titles and property. Make them common. It would collapse the entire political order of Wizarding Britain. Every committee chair, every Wizengamot seat, every inherited privilege that these families hold, gone. Overnight. The power vacuum alone would be good." She stopped writing. "Good? Yes, good. A power vacuum means room for something better. Or something worse. Power vacuums don't automatically fill with justice, Harry. They fill with whoever moves fastest. Then we move fastest." He met her eyes. "Hermione, I watched Lucius Malfoy walk out of that courtroom today. Free. Again. The same man who slipped Tom Riddle's diary to an 11-year-old girl and nearly got her killed. The same man who stood in a graveyard and watched Voldemort come back and cheered. The same man in whose house you were. He stopped. He walked free because the same system that let him buy his way out the first time is still running. The names changed. The letterhead changed. But the machine is the same, and it's already grinding again. Hermione set down her quill. I know. Your Muggleborn rights proposal. Tabled. Not even voted down, just tabled, because the people running the committees are the same people who've always run them, and they don't want things to change. They never wanted things to change. They just wanted Voldemort gone so they could go back to doing what they were doing before, which was the slower, quieter version of exactly what he wanted. I know, Harry. Then what's the argument for not doing this? She was quiet for a moment. Rain drummed against the high windows. The argument, she said carefully, is that you'd be using a 1,000-year-old autocratic mechanism to unilaterally reshape society. One person making a decision that affects thousands of lives. That's not democracy. That's not justice. That's what they've been doing to us for centuries. One class of people making decisions for everyone else based on who their grandparents were. At least this ends it. And what comes after? When you've torn it all down, who builds it back up? We do. You, me, Kingsley, Neville, anyone who wants a seat at the table regardless of their blood. Hermione studied him. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel transparent, not judged, but seen, all the way through. It was unnerving even when you loved her. You've already decided, she said. Not yet. But I'm close. Then before you decide, promise me one thing. What? Let me research it properly. Give me 3 days with the full charter. Let me understand exactly what the magic does, what the limits are, what the consequences look like. And then, if you still want to do it, I'll help you do it right. Harry nodded. 3 days. And talk to Ron. He deserves to know what you're considering. I will. She picked up her quill again and began writing, and for a while the only sounds in the kitchen were the scratch of her pen and the rain and the distant, familiar creaking of the old house. Ron came by that evening, still dusty from working at the shop. He dropped into a chair in the kitchen, accepted a plate of sandwiches from Creature, who served Ron with noticeably more grace than Hermione, and listened while Harry laid it out. Harry told him everything. The rings, the charter, Clause 17, what it would mean. He didn't try to sell it or soften it. He just told him. Ron chewed his sandwich and stared at the table for a long time. Then he said, how many families? 28, according to Gringotts. Malfoys? Top of the list. Lestranges? Already extinct in the male line, but whatever's left of their holdings, yes. Knots? Crabs? All of them. Ron set down his sandwich. His jaw worked. Harry could see him thinking about Fred. About George alone in the flat above the shop. About the new glass in the front window and the blasting hex that had put it there. When the shop was hit, Ron said, George didn't tell anyone for 2 days. I only found out because Angelina fire called me. He'd already cleaned up most of the damage himself. When I got there he was just sitting behind the counter with his wand in his hand, staring at the door. He said he'd been sitting there since it happened. 2 days. Waiting for them to come back. Ron, he's not sleeping. He barely eats. He lost Fred, and now someone's sending him a message, that it isn't over, that they can still reach him, that winning the war didn't actually mean winning anything. And the Aurors said random vandalism. Ron's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. Do it. Just like that. Just like that. Burn it down. All of it. Ron looked at him. You're Harry Potter. You've got more right to make this call than anyone alive. And if you don't do it now, while the war's still fresh enough that people remember what these families did, they'll bury it. They'll smooth it over. They'll make everyone forget, the way they always do, and in 20 years we'll be right back here. He picked up his sandwich again. So yeah. Do it. Harry felt something settle in his chest. Not anger, something colder, quieter. Certainty. Hermione wants 3 days to research. Course she does. Wouldn't trust it if she didn't. But you've got my vote. They ate in silence for a while. Then Ron said, "You know this is going to make enemies. Not the kind you can fight with a wand. Political enemies. Money enemies. The kind that come at you through the prophet and the courts and whisper campaigns. I know. And you know that the second you put those rings on, you become the most powerful political figure in Britain. More than Kingsley. More than anyone. I know that too. And that doesn't scare you?" Harry thought about it honestly. "It worries me. But not enough to stop me." Ron nodded. "Good. Because if you were scared, I'd be worried. The Harry Potter I know doesn't flinch." 3 days later, Hermione came back. She arrived at Grimmauld Place with 4 notebooks full of notes, a stack of copied parchments she'd talked Ragnarok into letting her transcribe, and an expression that Harry had learned to recognize as barely contained intellectual excitement masquerading as scholarly caution. "Tell me," he said. They sat in the drawing room, the one Harry had cleared out, removing the family tapestry from the wall and replacing it with a large blank chalkboard that Hermione had enchanted to function as a research board. She began pinning her notes to it as she talked. "The charter is real. The oaths are real. The magic is real. I verified it through 3 independent sources, Gringotts records, the Hogwarts archives, which I accessed through McGonagall, and a 14th-century legal treatise I found in the Black family library, which, honestly, Harry, the books in this house are terrifying and incredible in equal measure. Focus. Right. Clause 17. The dissolution of dishonored houses. Here's how it works." She pointed to a section of the chalkboard where she'd written out the process in her precise handwriting. "The Lord of 3 or more founding seats presents himself before the Wisengamot and formally invokes the clause. He names the families he accuses of oath-breaking and states the grounds. The magic of the charter then, and this is the important part, the magic itself evaluates the claim. It's not a vote. It's not a trial. The rings connect to the original oath magic, and if the accused families genuinely broke their oaths, the dissolution activates automatically. The Wisengamot doesn't get a say. The Wisengamot was created by the charter. It exists at the pleasure of the founding houses. That's what makes this so extraordinary, and so terrifying to the people in power. The entire body operates under a magical framework that supersedes its own procedural rules. They can scream about it, they can protest, they can pass motions condemning it, but they can't stop it. The magic doesn't care about their feelings. What happens to the people? The actual witches and wizards in these families? They lose everything tied to the charter. Hereditary seats, gone. Titles, gone. Vault entailments, the magical locks that tie ancestral wealth to the family name, dissolved. Ancestral property wards that are anchored to the family magic, collapsed. Any magical protections granted by the family name, and there are more of those than you'd think, including certain legal immunities and blood ward structures, stripped. She paused. But nobody gets hurt physically. Nobody goes to prison because of the dissolution itself. They just become ordinary. Ordinary. No titles. No inherited political power. No legal privileges. No ancestral wards. They keep whatever personal property isn't entailed to the family name, personal vaults, personal possessions, property bought with their own earned money rather than inherited through the line. But the vast majority of pureblood wealth is inherited and entailed. So in practice, they lose almost everything. In practice, Lucius Malfoy goes from being one of the wealthiest and most politically connected men in Britain to a wizard with a personal vault and whatever furniture isn't bolted to the manor that's about to become ownerless. Harry let that sit. He turned it over. It was enormous, bigger than any single act of magic he'd ever contemplated, and he'd walked to his own death once. What about the families that weren't Death Eaters, he asked. The Greengrasses. The Zabinas. Families that stayed neutral. Hermione's expression shifted. That's where it gets complicated. The oaths don't just cover direct service to a dark wizard. They cover enabling, harboring, funding. And neutrality during the war isn't the same as innocence. Several neutral families provided financial support to Death Eater causes, turned a blind eye to dark activities, or actively profited from the conflict. The magic will evaluate each case individually, but some neutral families will almost certainly be affected. Will the Longbottoms? No. The Longbottoms have an unbroken record of opposing dark magic. They're one of the few old families whose oaths are completely intact. The Weasleys? The Weasleys aren't a charter family, they lost their seat 3 centuries ago in a financial dispute. They're not covered by the oaths, which means they're not affected by the dissolution. Ironic, really. The family that the purebloods mocked for being poor is the one that's going to come through this with nothing to lose. Harry walked to the window. Grimmauld Place looked out onto a grey London street, muggles passing by in the rain, oblivious to the house they couldn't see. He watched them for a moment, people living their lives, no inherited seats, no ancestral magic, no titles or blood status. Just people. You said you'd help me do it right, he said. Did you mean that? I meant it. But I want to be clear about what I think right looks like. She came and stood beside him. If you do this, you can't do it in anger. It can't be revenge. The moment it becomes personal, the moment it's about punishing Lucius Malfoy instead of fixing a broken system, it loses its legitimacy. It's not about Malfoy. I believe you. But the world won't. They'll say the Chosen One went on a power trip. They'll say you became the thing you fought against. You need to be so clean, so precise, so right that there's no room for that narrative. I'll have you for that. She smiled faintly. You'll have me for that. And after. When it's done. We build something better. We build something better, she agreed. He turned from the window and walked back to the table where the leather case from Gringotts sat, still open, the 3 rings catching the weak light. Harry reached for the Potter ring first. It was warm, not from the room, but from something else, something that felt like a heartbeat in the metal. He slid it onto the ring finger of his right hand, and a pulse of magic moved through him, gentle but deep, like the first note of a song he'd always known but never heard played aloud. He felt something click into place behind his sternum. A connection. A lineage. Generations of Potters reaching back through time, their magic recognizing his. The black ring was colder, sharper. He put it on the middle finger of his right hand and felt a rush of something darker, not evil, but fierce. Defensive. The Black family magic was a guard dog, all teeth and suspicion, and it tested him for a long, uncomfortable moment before accepting him. He felt it settle into his bones like armor. He thought of Sirius and almost smiled. The Gryffindor ring. He picked it up and felt the weight of it, heavier than it should have been, as if it carried something beyond metal. The lion on the crest seemed to move in his peripheral vision, though when he looked directly at it, it was still. He slid it onto his index finger. The world shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no burst of light, no thunderclap, no orchestral swell. But Harry felt the magic of Wizarding Britain respond to him, like a vast instrument acknowledging a new player. He could feel the threads of ancient oaths running through the fabric of the magical world, thousands of them, stretching from this ring to every family that had ever sworn to the Gryffindor line. Most of them were taut and humming with violation. Broken promises. Betrayed trusts. Oaths shattered so thoroughly that the magic was straining to hold itself together. He could feel the Malfoy line, a thread so corroded with broken oaths it was barely holding. The Lestranges, snapped entirely. The Knots. The Crabs. The Averys. The Rolls. The Selwyns. Dozens of families, their oath magic rotting, and they didn't even know it. They'd been walking around with the magical equivalent of condemned buildings overhead, and the only thing holding those buildings up was the fact that no one had ever had the authority to declare them condemned. Until now. Harry? Hermione's voice was distant. Are you all right? He looked at his hands. 3 rings. The Potter gold, the black silver, the Gryffindor red gold. They hummed against his skin, and he felt more solid than he had in months. More present. More real. I can feel them, he said. All of them. Every broken oath. Every family that turned. What does it feel like? He thought about it. Like standing in a building full of cracks. You can see where every support beam has failed. And you know that all you have to do is push, and the whole thing comes down. Are you going to push? Harry took a breath. Not yet. First, I need to talk to Neville. Neville Longbottom was in the greenhouse behind his grandmother's estate in Lancashire, elbow deep in soil, when Harry brought onto the front lawn. The Longbottom estate was old and solid, not grand like Malfoy Manor, but sturdy, built by people who valued function over display. The gardens were immaculate, the hedgerows sharp, the wards subtle but strong. Harry could feel them now, with the rings on his fingers, the Longbottom wards registered as a warm, steady pulse, tied to oath magic that was completely intact. He found Neville in Greenhouse 3, repotting a venomous tentacula with the calm confidence of a man who'd killed a giant snake with a magic sword and had decided that nothing else in the plant kingdom was going to intimidate him. Harry. Neville looked up and smiled. He was broader than he'd been during school, the war had burned away the last of his adolescent softness, and he looked like someone you trust to guard a door. I'd offer you tea, but I've got sap on my hands and the kettle's inside. This isn't a tea conversation. Neville's smile faded. He looked at Harry more carefully, and his eyes went to the rings. Merlin, he said. Is that what I think it is? Depends on what you think it is. Neville set down his trowel and stripped off his gloves. That's the Gryffindor ring. I've seen drawings of it in Gran's books. She keeps a library of Founding-era records, she's slightly obsessed. He stepped closer. 3 lordship rings. Potter, Black, and Gryffindor. Neville, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me before you react. That's never a good start to a conversation. Harry told him. All of it, just as he'd told Ron, holding nothing back. Neville listened without interrupting, his hands still at his sides, his face unreadable. When Harry finished, Neville walked to a bench at the back of the greenhouse and sat down heavily. 28 families, he said. At least. Including the Knots. The Lestranges. Neville's voice didn't change, but his hands tightened on the edge of the bench. The people who tortured my parents. Yes. And the families that protected them. That funded them. That gave them places to hide and gold to spend and political cover while my mom and dad were screaming in a ministry holding cell. Yes. Neville was quiet for a long time. A fanged geranium snapped at a passing insect on the shelf above his head. Gran always said the system was rotten, he said finally. She said the founders built something good and the families that inherited it turned it into a weapon. She said the only reason she played the game, kept the Longbottom seat, wore the robes, showed up to the galas, was because if she didn't, there'd be one less decent voice in the room. He looked at Harry. She's going to support this. Completely. Vocally. You know that, right? I hoped. She'll probably write you a letter with so many exclamation points the parchment catches fire. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. What do you need from me? I need Lord Longbottom to stand with me when I invoke the clause. One of the oldest, most respected pureblood names in Britain, publicly supporting the dissolution. It takes away the argument that this is a Muggleborn or half-blood vendetta. Is that all? No. I need my friend Neville to tell me honestly if he thinks this is the right thing to do. Neville stood. He walked to the workbench and picked up a watering can, poured a careful measure into a pot containing a small, silvery plant that Harry didn't recognize. This is a moon petal, Neville said. Very rare. It only grows in soil that's been cleared of everything else. You have to strip the bed completely, remove every root and seed from whatever was growing there before, or the moon petal gets choked out. It can't compete with established plants. None of the good ones can. He set down the watering can. You have to clear the ground first. That's just how it works. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Harry. 2 days later, an owl arrived at Grimmauld Place. Harry was in the kitchen, drinking coffee and going over the list of 28 families with Hermione, when a large barn owl swooped through the window. Creature always left open and dropped a scorched envelope on the table. The letter inside was brief. Mr. Potter, I'd like a word. Alone. The Leaky Cauldron, tonight, 8 o'clock. Back room. I'm not your enemy. But I might be useful. D. Greengrass. Harry showed it to Hermione. She frowned. Daphne Greengrass. Slytherin, our year. Stayed out of the war as far as anyone knows. Her family's in the neutral camp. Her father Cyrus runs half the Gringotts finance committees. Could be a trap. Could be an opportunity. If a Slytherin pureblood is approaching you before you've even made a public move, it means the rumor mill is already turning. People know something's coming. She paused. Go. But bring your wand and don't drink anything she gives you. Comforting. The back room of the Leaky Cauldron was small, dim, and smelled like old wood and spilled butterbeer. Harry arrived 5 minutes early and found Daphne Greengrass already there, sitting at a table with 2 glasses of fire whiskey, reading a copy of Magical Law Review with the bored ease of someone who read legal journals for pleasure. She looked up when he came in. He'd known her by sight at Hogwarts, tall, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with the kind of effortless poise that pure-blood girls seem to develop in the womb. She'd never been part of Malfoy's crowd, but she'd never been friendly to Harry's either. A Switzerland of a person. Potter, she said. Sit. Greengrass. He sat. He did not touch the fire whiskey. She noticed. A faint smile. It's not poisoned. But I respect the caution. She pushed her glass aside too, a gesture of good faith, or a very clever mimic of one. I'll be direct. I know what you're planning. I'm not planning anything. You claimed 3 lordship rings at Gringotts a week ago. The goblins are discreet, but not that discreet, not when the transaction involves founding house claims. My father has contacts in the bank. He knows. Which means others will know soon. Harry kept his expression neutral. The rings were on his fingers, hidden under a glamour, but he could feel them pulsing gently against his skin. What do you think I'm planning? He asked. Clause 17. She said it calmly, the way someone might say nice weather. The dissolution of dishonored houses. You're going to invoke it against every pureblood family that broke their charter oaths. And you're here because your family might be on that list. Something flickered in her eyes, the first crack in the composure. My family stayed neutral. Neutral isn't the same as innocent. Your father funded 3 Wizengamot campaigns for members who later turned out to be under Imperius. Or claimed to be. The Greengrass family's financial records show contributions to organizations that were later identified as Death Eater fronts. She stiffened. Those contributions were made in good faith, maybe. The oath magic will decide that, not me. They looked at each other across the table. The firelight cast moving shadows across her face, and Harry could see her calculating every angle, every possibility, every play available to her. "What do you want, Greengrass?" She leaned forward. "I want to help you." "Why?" "Because if you invoke the clause without any political sophistication, you'll trigger a civil war. The targeted families won't go quietly. They have resources, allies, international connections. Lucius Malfoy alone has contacts in 6 foreign ministries. You need someone who understands how these families think, how they'll react, where the pressure points are. And you're offering to be that someone." "I'm offering to be an advisor. An inside source. In exchange, I want you to look at the neutral families individually rather than sweeping them all in together. Some of them, genuinely tried to stay out of it. Treating them the same as the Malfoys and the Lestranges isn't justice. It's a blunt instrument." Harry considered her. She was good, composed, articulate, strategic. She'd come with a clear ask and a clear offer, which was more than most people managed. "You're also here for your sister," he said. Daphne blinked. The mask slipped for half a second, and underneath it he saw something raw and real. "Astoria is 16, Daphne said quietly. "She has a blood curse, a family affliction from old magic. The Greengrass ancestral wards are part of what keeps it manageable. If those wards fall, her condition destabilizes." Harry felt the weight of that settle on him. This was what Hermione had warned about, the human cost. Real people. Real consequences. A 16-year-old girl with a blood curse that was held in check by the very magic he was planning to dissolve. "I'm not trying to hurt your sister," he said. "I believe you. But you need to know what you're dealing with. It's not just gold and titles. For some families, the ancestral magic is woven into their health, their homes, their children. You pull that thread and people get hurt. And for other families, the ancestral magic was used to torture Muggleborns in their basements. Yes. Which is why I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to be precise." She held his gaze. "A scalpel, Potter. Not a sledgehammer." He sat with that for a long moment. Then he said, "If I agree to evaluate the neutral families separately, individually, on the merits, what do I get from you?" "Intelligence. I know how Lucius Malfoy thinks. I know what he'll do when he learns what's coming, and he will learn, probably within days. I know which families will fight, which will fold, and which can be turned. I know where the money is hidden and which vaults have secondary accounts the goblins haven't flagged." She paused. "And I can get you a meeting with my father. Cyrus Greengrass is the most influential neutral lord on the Wizengamot. If you can get him to stand aside, or better yet, stand with you, the opposition loses its moderate face. Your father will never stand with me. My father will do whatever protects his family. Right now, he thinks the old guard protects him. Show him that the old guard is a sinking ship, and he'll swim for the nearest lifeboat." Harry stood. He looked down at her, this sharp, calculating young woman who'd come to a back room in a pub to bargain for her family's survival with the most dangerous person she'd probably ever met. "I'll consider your offer," he said. "But Greengrass, if I find out you're playing both sides, feeding information back to Malfoy or anyone else, I won't need Clause 17 to make your life difficult." "Understood." She didn't flinch. "And Potter? For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is terrifying, and I think someone should have done it 100 years ago." He left the leaky cauldron and stepped into the night air of Diagon Alley. The shops were closed, the street empty, the bunting hanging limp in the still air. He stood there for a moment, feeling the 3 rings on his hand, feeling the broken oaths thrumming through the ancient magic like fault lines in stone. Tomorrow he would go to the Wizengamot. Tomorrow he would claim his seats, all 3 of them, and invoke a clause that hadn't been spoken aloud in 1,000 years. Tomorrow he would look Lucius Malfoy in the eye and tear the ground out from under him. But tonight, He walked back to Grimmauld Place through the quiet streets, and he thought about a 16-year-old girl with a blood curse, and he understood, with perfect clarity, that what he was about to do was both necessary and terrible, and that being right didn't make it easy. He pushed open the front door of number 12. Hermione was still at the kitchen table, still writing, surrounded by books and notes and cold cups of tea. She looked up when he came in. How was Greengrass? Smart. Dangerous. Potentially very useful. Did you trust her? Not even slightly. Good. Hermione smiled. That means you're ready. Harry sat down across from her, and for the next 4 hours they planned the dismantling of a world. Kreacher brought more tea. The rain started again around midnight, hammering against the old windows of the old house, and somewhere across London, in a newly restored manor with polished floors and a dark history, Lucius Malfoy slept soundly in a bed he'd bought with blood money, dreaming whatever dreams men like him dreamed. He wouldn't sleep soundly much longer. Chapter 2, The Motion. No one expected. Harry woke at 5 in the morning to find Kreacher standing at the foot of his bed holding a pressed set of dress robes and an expression of barely contained anticipation. Master's robes, Kreacher said, laying them across the chair by the window. Kreacher has prepared the black ones with the silver clasps. The Potter crest on the left breast. The black crest on the right. Kreacher was not sure where to place the third crest, so Kreacher has placed it on the back, between the shoulders. Harry sat up and looked at the robes. They were beautiful, better than anything he'd ever owned, cut from fabric so dark it seemed to swallow light. The Potter Griffin and the black greyhounds gleamed in silver thread, and when Kreacher turned the robes around, the Gryffindor lion blazed across the shoulders in red and gold. Kreacher, where did these come from? Kreacher found them in the attic. They belonged to Master Arcturus Black. Kreacher has altered them. The old elf's enormous eyes were bright. Master is going to the Wizengamot today. Master must look the part. Harry stared at him. How do you know I'm going to the Wizengamot? Kreacher hears things. Kreacher has always heard things. Master Regulus taught Kreacher that listening is the most important magic. He straightened the robes with a final, proprietary tug. Kreacher has also prepared breakfast. Eggs, toast, bacon, and strong coffee. Master will need his strength. Harry got out of bed. Kreacher. Yes, Master. Thank you. The elf's lower lip trembled. He snapped his fingers, vanished with a crack, and reappeared instantly with a polished pair of boots. Kreacher is not emotional, he announced firmly. Kreacher is efficient. And then he was gone again, back down to the kitchen, leaving Harry alone with the robes and the boots and the weight of what was coming. He dressed slowly. The robes fit perfectly, Kreacher's alterations were invisible, and the fabric moved like a second skin. He looked at himself in the old mirror on the wardrobe door. The scar was there, as always, a lightning bolt above his right eye. His hair was still a mess, no amount of magic had ever fixed that. But the robes changed something. He didn't look like a teenager anymore. He looked like someone who held the weight of 3 ancient houses on his shoulders and had decided to use it. He pulled off the glamour hiding the rings. They caught the early light, gold, silver, red gold, and he felt the magic pulse through him, steady as a second heartbeat. Well, he said to his reflection. Let's go start a war. His reflection, being a magical mirror in a house full of dark artifacts, said nothing. Probably for the best. Hermione was already downstairs, dressed in formal robes of her own, dark blue, professional, her hair pulled back tightly. She had a leather folder under her arm and the focused intensity of someone who had slept perhaps 2 hours and was running entirely on adrenaline and conviction. Ron was there too, leaning against the kitchen counter in clean but decidedly non-formal clothes, eating toast. I'm not going inside, Ron said before Harry could ask. Political theater isn't my thing. But I'll be outside with George and the others, and if anyone tries anything on your way out, I'll be there. The others? Angelina. Lee Jordan. Seamus and Dean. A few of the DA lot. Ron shrugged. Word's gotten around. Not the details, just that Harry Potter is going to the Wizengamot today and something big is happening. People want to show support. I didn't ask anyone to come. You never do. They come anyway. That's sort of the point of view. Harry looked at Hermione. The charter documents? She patted the leather folder. Certified copies from Gringotts, witnessed by Ragnarok himself. The original clause in Old English with a modern translation. A full list of the 28 families and their documented oath violations, cross-referenced with ministry records, Gringotts transaction logs, and testimony from the post-war trials. She paused. I also prepared a 12-page legal brief summarizing the constitutional basis for the invocation, in case anyone argues the clause is no longer valid. 12 pages. I was being concise. Ron snorted into his toast. Harry allowed himself a small smile, and then the smile faded, because in less than 2 hours he was going to walk into the most powerful political body in Wizarding Britain and set it on fire. Neville, he asked. Meeting us there. He sent an owl an hour ago. Augusta's coming too. Of course she is. A knock at the front door. Creature scuttled to answer it and returned with a small, folded note sealed with green wax. The Greengrass crest. Harry opened it. Malfoy knows something's happening. He's been making fire calls all morning, I counted 6 before dawn. He doesn't know the specifics, but he's mobilizing. Expect him to have allies in the chamber. Also, my father will be present. He is not yet decided. If you can speak to him before the session, you may have a chance. Don't waste it. DG Harry showed the note to Hermione, who read it and nodded. She's right about Malfoy. If he's mobilizing, he'll try to disrupt the session before you can finish the invocation. We need to get you to the podium and keep you there long enough for the magic to hear you. How long? The charter doesn't specify. The invocation is spoken, and the rings validate it. My best estimate is that once you begin the formal words, the magic will take over. But you need to get through the invocation without being interrupted, removed, or silenced. So don't get interrupted. Preferably, yes. Ron pushed off the counter. I'll send word to the others. If there's trouble inside, we'll make sure there's support outside. He clapped Harry on the shoulder. Give them hell. He left through the front door with one last look back, not worried, not afraid. Proud. Harry held on to that. Ready? Hermione asked. Let's go. The Ministry of Magic was buzzing. Harry felt at the moment they stepped out of the flue in the main atrium, an energy in the air, a tension that hummed beneath the surface of the usual morning bustle. People looked at him. They always looked at him, but today it was different. Today they stared at the robes, at the crests, at the 3 rings gleaming unconcealed on his right hand. He saw recognition flash across faces, people who understood heraldry, who knew what those crests meant together, whose eyes widened as the implications hit them. He walked through the atrium with Hermione at his side, and the crowd parted. Not politely, the way it usually did, urgently, as if something in the magic radiating from the rings was physically pushing people aside. Harry didn't slow down. He kept his pace steady, his spine straight, his eyes forward. They reached the lifts. A young ministry which was already inside, holding a stack of files. She saw Harry, saw the rings, and went pale. Going up? Harry asked. She scrambled out of the lift without answering. You're terrifying people, Hermione murmured as the golden grill closed. Good. They should be a little terrified today. The lift descended to level 10, the Wizengamot chambers. Harry had been here before, for his disciplinary hearing in 5th year, and the memory was not pleasant. The same dark corridors, the same cold stone, the same feeling of descending into the belly of something old and powerful and not entirely friendly. But this time he wasn't a frightened 15-year-old being railroaded by Cornelius Fudge. This time he was a lord of 3 founding houses, and the building itself seemed to recognize it. The torches along the corridor burned brighter as he passed. The stone hummed beneath his feet. The ancient wards of the ministry, built on the same magical foundations as the charter itself, resonated with the rings, and Harry felt the building acknowledge him, the way a sleeping dog lifts its head at the sound of its master's voice. The doors to the Wizengamot chamber were massive, iron-bound oak, older than the ministry building around them. 2 Auror guards stood on either side. Harry recognized one of them. Dawlish. The man who tried to arrest Dumbledore in 5th year and been blasted across the room for his trouble. Dawlish saw Harry and his hand drifted toward his wand. "Lord Potter," he said stiffly. "The Wizengamot is in open session. Are you here to observe?" "I'm here to take my seats." Dawlish's eyes dropped to the rings. His face went through a complicated series of expressions: confusion, recognition, alarm, and something that might have been fear. "You can't, the session is all ready, Article 4 of the Wizengamot Charter," Hermione said crisply. "A lord of a founding house may claim his seat at any point during an open session, without prior notice or appointment. The chamber is obligated to recognize him. You can verify this with the Wizengamot clerk if you like, but I'd suggest doing it quickly." Dawlish looked at his fellow guard. The other Auror shrugged. "Open the doors," Harry said. "Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just with absolute certainty." Dawlish opened the doors. The Wizengamot chamber was a vast, circular room, tiered like an amphitheater, with rows of high-backed wooden benches rising in concentric rings around a central floor. The ceiling was lost in shadow, enchanted to look like a night sky, though Harry suspected the enchantment had faded over the centuries, because the stars were dim and the darkness felt more real than magical. The chamber was full. 50 or 60 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes, seated in their assigned places, their attention focused on the central podium where Kingsley Shacklebolt stood in the minister's formal robes, mid-sentence in what sounded like a routine address about reconstruction funding. Every head turned when the doors opened. Kingsley stopped talking. The silence was immediate and total. Harry stood in the doorway with Hermione behind him, 3 rings blazing on his hand, 3 crests visible on his robes, and he watched the color drain from a dozen faces around the room. He found Lucius Malfoy immediately, 3rd row, near the aisle, dressed in dove-gray robes with his hair immaculate and his expression arranged in the careful blankness of a man who was always performing. Next to him, an older which Harry didn't recognize, Selwyn, probably, based on the crest. Behind them, a cluster of faces he knew from photographs in Hermione's files, Rowell, not senior, a younger man who was probably one of the Flint cousins. On the other side of the chamber, he spotted Neville. Lord Longbottom was seated in the Longbottom family's traditional seat, high up, near the back, wearing formal robes with the Longbottom crest. Beside him, Augusta Longbottom sat ramrod straight in a chair that seemed to exist solely through the force of her personality. She saw Harry and gave him one sharp nod. Kingsley recovered first. "Mr. Potter. This is an unexpected, Lord Potter." Harry's voice carried clearly through the chamber without magical amplification. The rings were doing something to his voice, lending it resonance. "Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor. I'm here to claim my seats." The murmur that swept through the chamber was like wine through dry grass. Harry watched it ripple outward, confusion in some faces, alarm in others, dawning horror in a few. Lucius Malfoy's expression didn't change, but his right hand tightened on the armrest of his bench. "Lord Potter." Kingsley's voice was measured, but Harry could see the tension in his shoulders. "The Wizengamot does not have active seats for Article 4, Hermione called from behind Harry. She stepped forward, opened her leather folder, and held up a document. The original Wizengamot Charter of 993 establishes permanent seats for the 4 founding houses of Hogwarts. These seats cannot be dissolved, suspended, or reassigned by any act of the Wizengamot itself, as they predate the body's formation. Lord Potter holds legitimate claim to 3 of these 4 seats through the Potter bloodline, the Black Bequest, and the Gryffindor inheritance. I have certified documentation from Gringotts confirming all 3 claims. This is preposterous, said a sharp voice from the 3rd row. A witch in expensive robes, Millicent Rowell, Harry recalled from the files, the matriarch of the Rowell family. The founding seats haven't been occupied in centuries. The rules governing them are archaic. Archaic isn't the same as invalid, Hermione said. The charter's magic is still active. If anyone doubts that, I'd suggest they consult the rings on Lord Potter's hand, which are currently connected to every oath bond in this room. Another murmur, louder this time. Harry saw several members of the Wizengamot glance at their own hands, at their own family rings, with uneasy expressions. Harry walked down the central aisle toward the floor of the chamber. His footsteps echoed. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody stood in his way. The rings thrummed with each step, and the ancient magic of the chamber responded. The dim stars on the ceiling brightened, one by one, as if waking up. He reached the central floor and turned to face the assembly. 50-odd faces looked back at him, hostile, curious, frightened, calculating. He found Neville, who gave him a tight smile. He found Augusta, who was watching with the fierce satisfaction of a woman who had waited decades for this moment. He found Lucius, whose grey eyes were flat and unreadable. And there, near the back, seated among the minor families who held courtesy seats, he found Daphne Greengrass. She was dressed in emerald robes, her dark hair loose over her shoulders, and she was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Beside her, an older wizard with the same sharp features, Cyrus Greengrass, her father. He looked deeply unhappy. Minister Shacklebolt, Harry said, turning back to Kingsley. I formally claim the founding seats of House Potter, House Black, and House Gryffindor. I present my rings as proof of claim and request that the Wizengamot acknowledge my right under the original charter. Kingsley stared at him. Harry could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes, the minister who wanted stability wrestling with the Order member who knew what the old families had done, who had fought beside Harry, who had seen the bodies. The clerk will verify the claim, Kingsley said finally. Madam Bones is dead, Harry said quietly. Murdered by Voldemort's forces in 1996. The name fell like a stone into water. Half the chamber flinched. Harry let the silence stretch. Her replacement, Kingsley said, his jaw tight, is Senior Clerk Alderton. Alderton, please verify Lord Potter's claim. A small, nervous wizard scurried forward with a large book and a quill that wrote by itself. He approached Harry with the wariness of someone approaching a lit explosive and held out a trembling hand. If Lord Potter would present the rings for verification, Harry held out his right hand. The 3 rings pulsed with light, gold, silver, red gold, and the self-writing quill leapt off the book and began scribbling furiously. Alderton's eyes went wide as the book filled with text on its own, lineage records, bequest confirmations, magical authentication codes that the charter's magic was generating through the rings. It's legitimate, Alderton said, his voice cracking. All 3 claims are verified by the charter's magic. The book has never responded like this. The founding seat verification hasn't been triggered in how long? Harry asked. Alderton swallowed. The records show the last founding seat claim was made in 1487. By Lord Hector Gryffindor Peverell. My ancestor, Harry said. He didn't look away from the chamber. Minister. My seats. Kingsley gestured, and 3 chairs materialized on the central floor, not summoned from storage but created by the chamber's own magic, rising from the stone as if they'd been sleeping beneath the surface. They were ancient, heavy things, one carved with griffins, one with serpentine hounds, one with a massive lion. They arranged themselves in a row, and Harry sat in the middle one, the Gryffindor chair. The lion's stone eyes seemed to follow the movements of everyone in the room. Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor is recognized, Kingsley said, and his voice was barely steady. The founding seats are restored to the chamber. The uproar was immediate. This is a farce. Millicent Rowell was on her feet, her face flushed. A boy of 18 waltzes in here with costume jewelry and a prepared speech, and we're supposed to, costume jewelry. Augusta Longbottom's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The old woman stood, leaning on her cane, her vulture hat slightly askew, and fixed Rowell with a stare that could have wilted steel. Those rings predate your family's name by 3 centuries, Millicent. I suggest you sit down before you embarrass yourself further. Order. Kingsley said firmly. The claim has been verified by the Charter's own magic. This is not a matter for debate. Lord Potter holds 3 founding seats, and unless someone in this chamber wants to argue with 1,000-year-old enchantments, I suggest we proceed. The noise subsided to a hostile murmur. Harry waited. Patience wasn't his natural strength, but he'd learned it during the war, learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was absolutely nothing and let other people's anxiety do the work for you. He caught Lucius Malfoy's eye. The older man was watching him with an expression that had shifted from blankness to something sharper, assessment. Calculation. Lucius didn't look frightened. He looked like a chess player studying an unexpected move, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Harry turned his attention away. Lucius could calculate all he wanted. He was about to find out that the board had changed. Minister Shacklebolt, Harry said, rising from the Gryffindor chair. I have business before the Wizengamot. The floor recognizes Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor. I invoke Clause 17 of the original Wizengamot Charter of 993. The words hit the chamber like a physical force. Harry felt it, the rings flared hot on his fingers, and the ancient magic of the Charter surged through the room. The stars on the ceiling blazed to full brightness for the first time in centuries, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating in the stone, in the wooden benches, in the bones of every witch and wizard present. The torches guttered and then burned blue-white, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. People were on their feet. Voices overlapped, shouting, demanding, questioning. But the magic didn't care about voices. The Charter was listening to the rings, and the rings were listening to Harry. Order! Kingsley shouted. Order! He can't do this. A heavy-set wizard Harry didn't recognize, not senior, based on the family ring on his finger, was gripping the railing in front of him, his face purple. Clause 17 hasn't been invoked in, no one's ever. I invoke the dissolution of dishonored houses, Harry continued, and his voice was something more than his voice now, the rings were speaking through him, lending his words the weight of 1,000 years of magical law. I name the families that have broken their oaths to the founding houses through acts of dark allegiance, blood war, and the practice of soul-corrupting magic. He pulled a scroll from inside his robes, the list, prepared with Hermione over 3 days of meticulous research, every name verified against Goblin records and Ministry files. House Malfoy. The thread of oath magic connecting the Malfoy ring to the Charter screamed. Harry felt it, a discordant vibration, like a string pulled to the point of snapping. Across the chamber, Lucius Malfoy went white. House Lestrange. House Knott. House Crabbe. House Goyle. House Avery. House Rowell. Each name was a hammer blow. The magic built with each one, the hum in the chamber deepening, the stars burning brighter. Family rings on fingers throughout the room began to glow, hot, angry red, the color of violated magic. House Selwyn. House Yaxley. House Dolohov. House Rosier. House Travers. House Mulciber. Millicent Rowell was staring at the ring on her finger, which was glowing so brightly it cast shadows. Her face was bloodless. Beside her, a wizard Harry recognized from Hermione's files as Thaddeus Selwyn was trying to pull his own ring off, yanking at it frantically. It wouldn't budge. House Carrow. House Jugson. House Gibbon. House McNair. Harry kept going. Name after name, and with each one, the chamber shook. The ancient magic was waking, stretching, testing the bonds it had held for a millennium. It was finding them broken. Shattered. Rotted through with dark magic and betrayed trust. He reached the end of the first section, the confirmed Death Eater families, the ones whose oath violations were so severe the magic barely needed to check. 18 names. 18 families that had served Voldemort directly, that had tortured and murdered and corrupted the magical world they'd sworn to protect. Then he paused. The chamber was in chaos. People were standing, shouting, clutching their rings. Kingsley had given up trying to maintain order and was gripping the podium with both hands, his face a mask of barely controlled shock. Hermione stood at the edge of the chamber, her leather folder clutched to her chest, watching Harry with wide, fierce eyes. "There are additional families," Harry said, and his voice cut through the noise like a knife, "whose violations are less direct but no less real. Families that funded dark causes. Families that harbored oath-breakers. Families that used their political positions to enable the darkest wizard in history." He read the remaining 10 names. Some he'd expected to cause an uproar, the Flints, the Burkes, the Parkinsons. Others were subtler targets, minor families whose financial contributions to Death Eater causes had been buried under layers of shell vaults and intermediaries, uncovered only through Hermione's forensic work with the Gringotts records. He did not name the Greengrasses. He felt, rather than saw, Daphne Greengrass exhale from her seat in the back row. He had made a decision about the neutral families, not a permanent one, but a strategic one. Name the clear violators first. Demonstrate the seriousness. Give the borderline cases a chance to choose a side. The last name fell from his lips, and the magic peaked. Every torch in the chamber turned gold, pure, burning gold, the color of the Gryffindor ring. The floor beneath Harry's feet blazed with light, and he looked down to see the original charter seal, the intertwined crests of all 4 founders, glowing in the stone, pulsing like a heartbeat. The rings on his hand were almost too hot to bear, but he didn't flinch. And then, one by one, across the chamber, the family rings of the named houses began to crack. Not physically, the metal didn't break. But the magic inside them fractured, visibly, audibly. Hairline fractures of light raced across the surface of ancient rings, and their bearers gasped, cried out, or simply stared in horror as the magical bonds that had defined their families for 1,000 years came apart. Lucius Malfoy raised his left hand and stared at the Malfoy lordship ring. A web of golden cracks spread across the platinum surface, and the emerald set in its center went dark, not cracked, not fallen, just dead, the light inside it extinguished like a snuffed candle. "No," Lucius whispered. It was the first word Harry had heard him speak, and it was barely audible. "No, this cannot, the Charter's magic has evaluated the claims," Harry said. "The oaths were broken. The dissolution is in effect." Pandemonium. The chamber erupted. Wizards and witches surged to their feet, shouting over each other, pointing at Harry, clutching their damaged rings, pushing toward the exits. 2 Auror guards burst through the main doors, wands drawn, and stopped short when they saw the blazing golden light that filled the room. "Arrest him!" Not Senior roared, jabbing a finger at Harry. "He's attacked the Wizengamot. He's using dark magic too." "It's not dark magic," Augusta Longbottom said calmly, still in her seat, utterly unfazed by the chaos around her. "It's the oldest legal mechanism in our system. If you'd bothered to read the charter your family swore an oath to, you'd know that. This is illegal, it is precisely the opposite," Hermione said, stepping forward into the light. "Clause 17 is the legal foundation upon which the Wizengamot's own authority rests. It predates every law this body has ever passed. Challenging it would be like challenging the existence of gravity. You're welcome to try, but the results will be the same." Kingsley had come down from the podium. He grabbed Harry's arm and pulled him aside, his voice low and urgent. "Harry, what have you done?" "What I said I was going to do. You've just attacked the political establishment of the entire country. 28 families, do you understand the fallout? I understand it better than anyone in this room. Harry met his eyes. Kingsley, those families broke their oaths. Every single one of them. The magic confirmed it. I didn't decide anything. The charter decided. The rings decided. I just pulled the lever. You pulled a lever that's going to bring down the government. The government was already down. It was lying on its face with a boot on its neck. I'm just pointing that out. Kingsley stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not acceptance, not approval, but recognition. The recognition of a man who had fought in 2 wars and seen the same faces on the other side both times. You'd better have a plan for what comes next, Kingsley said. I do. It had better be a damn good one. It is. Kingsley released his arm and turned back to the chamber, raising his wand and sending a cannon blast of sound through the room. Order. Everyone will return to their seats or be removed from the chamber. The noise subsided reluctantly. People sat, but the tension was a physical thing, thick and crackling and dangerous. Harry stood on the central floor, surrounded by 3 chairs that had risen from the stone at his command, bathed in golden light that poured from the charter seal beneath his feet. He looked at Lucius Malfoy. The man had not moved from his seat. He sat perfectly still, his cracked ring on his finger, his grey eyes fixed on Harry. The panic that had flashed across his face was gone, replaced by something harder. Colder. This was the Lucius Malfoy who had survived 2 wars and 2 masters, the man who treated political catastrophe as a puzzle to be solved. Lord Potter, Lucius said, and his voice was silk over razors. A dramatic performance. Quite impressive. But surely you understand that invoking an archaic clause, even if its magic is genuine, does not override centuries of established legal precedent. The Wisingamoth's own statutes supersede, nothing supersedes the charter, Harry said. The charter created the Wisingamoth. The Wisingamoth exists because the charter says it does. Every statute this body has ever passed operates within the framework the charter established. You can't use the creation to overrule the creator. A debatable legal theory. Debate it with the ring on your finger. Harry nodded at Lucius's left hand. The one that's cracking as we speak. Lucius glanced at his ring, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. Harry saw fury underneath it, pure, white-hot, barely contained. Then the mask snapped back into place. This will be challenged, Lucius said. In every court, before every legal body, through every available mechanism. You've overreached, Potter, and you will be brought to heel. You're welcome to try. But while you're filing motions, your vault entailments are dissolving. Your ancestral wards are collapsing. The magic doesn't wait for legal briefs, Malfoy. It's already happening. That landed. Harry saw it hit, a flinch, quickly suppressed, at the word wards. Malfoy Manor's legendary protections, built over centuries by the darkest and most paranoid of the Malfoy line, were anchored to the charter oath. If those wards fell, the manor was just a house. A big, expensive, unprotected house. You'll excuse me, Lucius said, rising from his seat with perfect poise. I have urgent business to attend to. He swept down the aisle toward the exit, and Harry watched him go, watched the way people moved aside for him, the way his spine stayed rigid, the way he didn't look back. He was going to fight. Of course he was. Lucius Malfoy didn't surrender, he regrouped. Let him regroup. The charter's magic was already in motion, and no amount of political maneuvering was going to put the genie back in the bottle. The session dissolved into controlled chaos. Kingsley officially suspended proceedings pending review and ordered all members to remain available for emergency sessions in the coming days. People fled the chamber in clusters, the targeted families in tight, panicked groups, the unaffected members in stunned silence, the press gallery in a frenzy of scribbling quills and flashing cameras. Harry walked out of the chamber with Hermione beside him and found the corridor packed with people. Ministry workers who'd heard the commotion, Aurors maintaining a precarious perimeter, and a crowd of younger witches and wizards who'd somehow gotten wind of what was happening and come to see for themselves. Ron was at the front, arms folded, George beside him. Behind them, a loose cluster of familiar faces, Seamus, Dean, Angelina, Lee Jordan, Luna Lovegood drifting serenely at the edge of the crowd with a dreamy expression that suggested she found the collapse of the established political order mildly interesting. "Well?" Ron said. "It's done," Harry said. "Or rather, it started. The Prophet's going to have a field day. The Prophet can say whatever it wants. The magic doesn't care about newspapers." They moved through the corridors toward the lifts, and Harry noticed something strange: the ministry itself was responding to the dissolution. Plaques on office doors were changing. The Department of Magical Heritage, which processed family title registrations, had a line out the door of confused-looking witches and wizards holding documents that were literally rewriting themselves. In the atrium, the great fountain, rebuilt after the war to show witches and wizards of all backgrounds standing together, was glowing faintly gold, resonating with the charter magic that was spreading through every institution built on the original oaths. "It's bigger than I thought," Hermione murmured, watching a ministry directory board flicker as names and titles rearranged themselves. "The charter magic is woven into the entire infrastructure. When the oaths break, everything connected to them shifts." "Is that dangerous?" "Not physically. But imagine you pulled one thread from a tapestry and discovered it was connected to every other thread. The tapestry doesn't explode, it just starts unraveling." She watched another plaque rewrite itself. "This is going to take days, maybe weeks, to fully propagate." They reached the atrium. Neville was waiting by the flue, Augusta beside him. The old woman looked at Harry with an expression that was almost predatory in its satisfaction. "Lord Potter," Augusta said. "I have waited 30 years to see those faces. 30 years of watching the people who destroyed my son and daughter-in-law sit in their fine seats and make their fine speeches and pretend that their hands were clean." She took Harry's hand and gripped it hard. "My family stands with you. Publicly, vocally, and permanently. Thank you, Lady Longbottom. Don't thank me. Thank the founders for having the foresight to build a guillotine into the system." She released his hand and turned to Neville. "Come. We have letters to write and allies to shore up. The real war starts now." Neville looked at Harry. "See you tonight? We should coordinate. Grimmauld Place. 8 o'clock. Neville nodded and left with his grandmother. Harry watched them go and felt a surge of something warm, gratitude, maybe, or just the simple comfort of knowing he wasn't alone. Then a hand caught his elbow, light but insistent. He turned. Daphne Greengrass stood behind him, her expression neutral, her green eyes sharp. "Walk with me," she said. "Now. Before the press arrives." He looked at Hermione, who gave him a small nod. Then he followed Daphne through a side corridor, away from the main atrium, into a quiet alcove near the Department of Mysteries entrance. "You didn't name my family," Daphne said without preamble. "No. Why?" "Because your family's case is ambiguous. The financial contributions your father made could be interpreted as unwitting support for front organizations. The oath magic might dissolve your family's claims anyway. It's evaluating everything independently. But I chose not to force the issue from the podium." She studied him. "That was either merciful or strategic. Does it matter which?" "It matters to me. If it was mercy, you're softer than I thought, and softness will get you killed in the next few weeks. If it was strategy, then you understand that you need allies inside the Pureblood establishment, and you're smart enough to leave the door open for them. I left the door open for the families that might deserve it. Your sister has a blood curse that depends on your ancestral wards. I'm not in the business of killing 16-year-olds through collateral damage." Something shifted in Daphne's face. The mask cracked, not dramatically, just a softening around the eyes, a loosening of the jaw. She looked at him differently. "My father wants to meet with you," she said. "Tonight." I'm meeting with Neville tonight. Then tomorrow. Early. Before the emergency session Kingsley will inevitably call. What's he going to say? He's going to tell you that you've made a terrible mistake and that you can still walk it back. He's going to threaten you with international consequences and economic collapse. She paused. And then, when you don't flinch, he's going to ask you what it would cost to keep the Greengrass name off your list permanently. What would you advise me to say? I'd advise you to listen to him, take his measure, and then tell him the truth, that the oath magic is evaluating his family independently, and the only thing that will save the Greengrass name is if the magic itself finds it clean. She stepped closer. But I'd also advise you to ask for something in return for the meeting. My father respects strength, not generosity. What should I ask for? Ask him to recuse himself from the Gringotts finance committees. All of them. Voluntarily. It removes a key obstruction point for your reforms and signals to the other neutral families that cooperation is the smart play. Harry looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who should have been his enemy, who came from the world he was dismantling, and who was calmly, methodically helping him dismantle it faster. Why are you doing this, Greengrass? Really? I told you. I'm protecting my family. There are easier ways to protect your family than aligning yourself with the man who just declared war on Pureblood society. She held his gaze. My mother died when I was 12. Blood curse. Same one Astoria has. The healers said there might be a treatment, experimental, expensive, but possible. My father applied for research funding through the St. Mungo's board. The board was chaired by a Malfoy appointee. The funding was denied because the research involved Muggle medical techniques, and the board's policy, written by purebloods, for purebloods, prohibited the integration of Muggle science into magical healing. The words hung in the air between them. My mother died because purebloods decided that their ideology was more important than a woman's life. I will not watch that happen to my sister. Her voice didn't waver. So yes, Potter. I'm protecting my family. And right now, you're the best way to do that. Harry nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock. Have your father meet me at Grimmauld Place. He won't come to a black family residence. He will if he wants to talk to me. A ghost of a smile. Fair enough. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the stone floor. Harry watched her go and then leaned against the wall of the alcove, letting out a long breath. The rings pulsed on his hand. The charter magic hummed through the building. Somewhere above him, the wizarding world was waking up to the news that everything had changed, and the screaming was just beginning. He went back to the atrium to find Hermione. The Daily Prophet's evening edition hit the streets at 4 o'clock, and the headline was everything Harry expected and nothing he wanted. Potter invokes ancient clause, 28 pureblood families face dissolution, the boy who lived declares war on wizarding tradition. The article was breathless, sensational, and surprisingly accurate. Someone in the press gallery had taken detailed notes. It included quotes from unnamed Gringotts members, calling Harry everything from a revolutionary hero to a dangerous autocrat. Lucius Malfoy had given a statement. Lord Potter's actions today represent an unprecedented abuse of archaic authority. The affected families will pursue every legal avenue to protect their rights and heritage. We will not be erased. Rita Skeeter's column, running alongside the main story, was headlined, Power Mad Potter, Savior or Tyrant? Harry didn't bother reading it. He sat in the drawing room at Grimmauld Place with Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Augusta, the newspaper spread across the table between them. Outside, an actual crowd had gathered on the street, wizards and witches who'd figured out the location of the black family residence and come to either support or protest. Ron had counted about 40 people, roughly split between those holding "Support Potter" signs and those holding "Save Our Heritage" ones. It's starting, Augusta said, sipping tea with the serene confidence of a woman who had weathered worse. The editorial pages will be full of opinion pieces by morning. The families will have organized their legal response by end of day tomorrow. And Malfoy will have reached out to every international contact he has. Let him, Harry said. I intend to. But we must be prepared for the response. Lucius Malfoy is many things, but stupid is not among them. He will not fight this on emotion. He will fight it on law, on precedent, on international pressure. He will make this about governance, not guilt. She's right, Hermione said. I've been thinking about Malfoy's most likely moves. First, he'll challenge the legitimacy of the invocation in the Wizengamot itself, argue that the clause is defunct, that the Charter's authority has been superseded by modern legislation. That won't work legally, but it will create noise and delay. Second? Neville asked. Second, he'll go international. The International Confederation of Wizards has oversight authority over member states' internal governance. If Malfoy can frame this as one man using unchecked power to strip rights from citizens, the ICW might intervene, impose sanctions, demand a reversal, even send observers. Can they actually reverse it? Ron asked. No. The Charter magic is domestic and self-executing, no external body has jurisdiction over it. But they can make Britain's international position very uncomfortable. Trade agreements, cooperative law enforcement, Quidditch schedules, everything gets complicated when the ICW is unhappy with you. Quidditch schedules. Ron looked genuinely alarmed. Focus, Ronald. Third move, Harry said. He'll go after me personally. Reputation, credibility, legitimacy. He'll try to paint me as a dictator, a power-hungry teenager who's abusing the memory of the war to seize control. That narrative is already forming, Augusta said, tapping the Skeeter column. This woman is loathsome, but she's effective. By the end of the week, half the wizarding world will be asking whether Harry Potter has become the next Dark Lord. Let them ask, Harry said. I don't need everyone to love me. I need the magic to hold. And it will hold, because the oaths were broken. That's not opinion. That's magical fact. It's also magical fact that several of the targeted families have children at Hogwarts, Neville said quietly. Kids who are about to find out that their family names don't mean anything anymore. That their parents' vaults might be seized. That the wards on their ancestral homes are coming down. He met Harry's eyes. I'm with you on this. You know that. But we have to think about the kids. McGonagall, Hermione said immediately. I'll write to her tonight. She needs to be prepared for the fallout at the school, counseling, support, making sure no one's victimized for their parents' choices. And the families that weren't named, Ron added. The ones who are sitting right now wondering if they're next. That's a lot of scared people, mate. Scared people do stupid things. Harry nodded. These were the conversations he needed, the ones that kept him sharp, that reminded him this wasn't a game of magical chess but an act with real consequences for real people. Neville, I need you to be visible this week. Talk to the press, talk to other lords, talk to anyone who'll listen. The message is simple, this isn't revenge, it's justice. The oaths were broken. The Charter provides a remedy. We're using it. I can do that. Augusta, I need you to work the Old Guard network. The families that weren't named, the ones who kept their oaths clean, they need to hear from someone they respect that this isn't an attack on tradition. It's a restoration of it. The founders built the oath system to prevent exactly what these families did. With pleasure, Augusta said, and meant it. Hermione, legal defense. When Malfoy's challenges come, and they will, I need you ready with chapter and verse. Already working on it. Ron, I'll handle security. Ron's voice was matter-of-fact. You're the biggest target in Wizarding Britain right now. We need eyes on Grimmauld Place, on the Burrow, on everyone close to you. I'll talk to the DA people. Set up watches. Harry looked around the table at them, his people, his friends, the ones who'd been with him through everything. Not an army, not a political machine, but something better. Something real. One more thing, he said. Daphne Greengrass has offered to act as an intelligence source inside the Pureblood establishment. She has her own reasons, her sister's health depends on the outcome. I've agreed to meet her father tomorrow morning. You trust her? Ron asked. I trust her motivations. She wants to protect her family. That makes her predictable. Predictable people can still be dangerous, Augusta observed. Predictable people can also be managed. Harry stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be worse. Worse than declaring war on the entire pureblood aristocracy? Ron asked. That was the easy part. Now we have to win. Later, long after the others had gone and the house was quiet, Harry sat alone in the drawing room where Sirius's family tapestry had once hung. The wall was bare now, but he could still see the faint outlines where the fabric had been, ghostly traces of the Black family tree, all those names connected by lines of descent, some burned away by Sirius's mother for the crime of being decent people. The rings hummed softly on his hand. He could feel the dissolution working, a slow, vast process, like tectonic plates shifting. Across Britain, in manors and townhouses and country estates, the ancestral wards of 28 families were beginning to falter. Vault entailments were dissolving. Legal protections were evaporating. The magical infrastructure of pureblood power was coming apart, thread by thread, and Harry sat at the center of it and felt every vibration. He thought about Draco. He hadn't seen Draco in the chamber today. The younger Malfoy didn't hold a Wisengamot seat. He'd probably heard the news by now, though. Probably standing in Malfoy Manor watching the wards flicker, feeling the magic that had protected his family for centuries begin to die. Harry wasn't sure how he felt about that. Draco had been a bully, a bigot, a coward, and, in the end, a scared teenager who'd been in over his head. He'd lowered his wand on the astronomy tower. He hadn't identified Harry at the manor, even when it would have been easy, even when his aunt was screaming at him to confirm it. Small mercies. Small rebellions. None of which changed the fact that the Malfoy family had broken every oath they'd ever sworn. The magic didn't grade on a curve. A soft pop. Creature appeared at his elbow with a glass of fire whiskey. Master should drink, the elf said. Master has had a long day. Harry took the glass. Creature, did you know about the charter? About Clause 17. Creature's enormous eyes blinked slowly. Creature knows many things. Creature served the Black family for many decades. The old masters spoke of the charter sometimes, in whispers, when they thought Creature was not listening. He paused. Master Orion, Sirius's father, once told Mistress Walburga that the greatest threat to the pureblood houses was not Muggleborns or Dark Lords, but the charter itself. He said the founders had built a trap, and that every family that broke its oath was walking further into it. He was right. Master Orion was often right. He was also often cruel. The two are not related. Creature straightened. Does Master require anything else? No. Thank you, Creature. The elf vanished. Harry sipped the fire whiskey and stared at the bare wall where 28 families' worth of history was being erased, and he did not feel guilty, and he did not feel triumphant. He felt like a man who had pulled a lever that needed pulling and was waiting to see what came through the door. The fire crackled. The rings hummed. Outside, the crowd had thinned, but a few diehards remained, their voices carrying faintly through the walls, chanting something Harry couldn't quite make out. He finished the whiskey, set down the glass, and went to bed. Tomorrow, the counterattack would begin. He'd be ready. Chapter 3, What Falls When the Names Die. Harry woke to the sound of wards screaming. Not Grimmauld Place's wards, those were humming steadily, reinforced by the Black family magic that still recognized him as master of the house. These were distant, carried to him through the rings like a radio signal. Somewhere in Britain, ancestral wards were collapsing, and the charter magic was feeding him every tremor. He lay in the dark and felt them go. One by one, like candles being snuffed. The Avery estate in Cornwall, old wards, brittle, tied to a family that had served dark wizards for 3 generations. They crumbled at 3:47 in the morning, and Harry felt the magical shockwave ripple through the oath bonds. The Crabbe property in Suffolk followed at 4:12. Then the Carrow townhouse in London at 4:30, its protections collapsing so completely that the building became visible to Muggles for the first time in 2 centuries. By dawn, 7 estates had lost their wards entirely, and another dozen were in various stages of failure, flickering, weakening, developing gaps. The charter magic was methodical. It didn't rush. It identified each strand of oath-bound magic, tested it, found it corrupted, and severed it cleanly. Harry got up, dressed, and went downstairs to find Hermione already at the kitchen table, surrounded by parchment and looking like she hadn't slept at all. 12 estates so far, she said without looking up. The Ministry's ward monitoring office has been sending emergency alerts all night. Kingsley's called an emergency cabinet meeting for 9 o'clock. And our guest? Cyrus Greengrass arrived 10 minutes ago. Creature put him in the drawing room. He's not happy about it. Good. Happy people don't negotiate honestly. Harry poured himself coffee, drank half of it standing up, and went to the drawing room. Cyrus Greengrass was a tall man in his 50s, lean and angular, with Daphne's sharp features and the kind of grooming that spoke of money so old it didn't need to announce itself. He stood by the window, not sitting, not touching anything, radiating discomfort at being inside a black family property. His robes were expensive but understated, dark green, no visible crests. A political choice, he'd come without his family's heraldry, presenting himself as an individual rather than a lord. Harry closed the door behind him. Lord Greengrass. Cyrus turned. His eyes went immediately to the rings, lingered there, then moved to Harry's face. Whatever he saw there seemed to confirm something he'd already suspected, because his expression settled into a kind of resigned wariness. Lord Potter. The words came stiffly. My daughter arranged this meeting. I want you to know that I am here against my better judgment. Then let's make it worth your time. Sit down. I prefer to stand. Then I'll stand too. Harry leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand, utterly relaxed. You know what I've done. You know why. Tell me what you're thinking. Cyrus's jaw tightened. What I'm thinking is that a teenager with 3 rings and a grudge has just torn the foundations out from under the oldest political institutions in our world. What I'm thinking is that the wards on the Avery estate fell 3 hours ago and the property is now visible to Muggles. What I'm thinking is that the Crabbe family vault sealed itself at midnight and Vincent Crabbe's mother, a woman who never took the mark, who never raised a wand in anger, is standing outside Gringotts right now with no access to her own money. Her husband's money, Harry said. Inherited through the family line, entailed through the charter. She has access to any personal accounts in her maiden name. She was a Selwyn before she married. That name is on your list too. Harry set down his coffee. Lord Greengrass, I didn't invite you here to argue about the Crabbes. I invited you here because your daughter told me you're a reasonable man, and I need reasonable people right now. Reasonable. Cyrus repeated the word like it tasted wrong. You want reasonable, Potter? Here's reasonable. You've destabilized every major wizarding family in Britain. You've triggered a financial crisis, the markets are already moving, goblin exchange rates are in flux, international trade agreements are being reviewed. The French ministry sent an inquiry to Kingsley at midnight. The Scandinavian Confederation has suspended its cooperation treaty pending review. You've given Lucius Malfoy, a man who should be in Azkaban, the moral high ground. Malfoy doesn't have the moral high ground. He has a megaphone. In politics, that's the same thing. They stared at each other. Cyrus Greengrass was not a stupid man. He was also not, as far as Harry could tell, an an evil one. He was the product of a system that had rewarded his family for centuries, and he was watching that system burn. "What do you want?" Cyrus asked. "From me. Specifically. Step down from the Gringotts finance committees. All of them. Voluntarily. Publicly." Cyrus blinked. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't that. "You want me to resign my committee positions? I want you to demonstrate, loudly and visibly, that the neutral families are willing to cooperate with change. Your resignation signals to the other uncommitted lords that working with me is the smart play. It also removes a key obstruction point for financial reforms that Hermione Granger is drafting. And in return, I tell you what I told your daughter. The oath magic is evaluating your family's history independently. I chose not to name the greengrasses from the podium because your case is ambiguous. If the magic finds your oaths intact, your family keeps everything. Titles, wards, vaults, all of it. And if it doesn't? Then no deal I make with you will matter, because the charter's magic supersedes both of us." Cyrus walked to the fireplace and stood there, staring into the dead grate. Harry waited. The man was processing, and pushing wouldn't help. "My daughter tells me you know about Astoria's condition," Cyrus said quietly. "I do. The ancestral wards are part of what keeps her stable. If those wards fall," he stopped. Swallowed. For a moment he wasn't a lord or a politician. He was a father. "She's 16, Potter." "I know. Do you? Do you know what it's like to watch your child suffer and know that the only thing standing between her and agony is magic that some boy with a ring might destroy?" Harry felt the weight of that. He let himself feel it, didn't deflect, didn't rationalize, didn't retreat into strategy. "No," he said. "I don't know what that's like. I grew up without parents, so I've never had the chance to worry about a child the way you do. But I do know what it's like to watch people suffer because the system protects the powerful at the expense of everyone else. I know what it's like to stand over the bodies of friends and know that the people responsible will walk free because they have the right last name." He paused. "I will do everything in my power to make sure your daughter isn't collateral damage. That's not a political promise, it's a personal one. But I will not stop the dissolution to protect the feelings of families who served Voldemort. The magic is doing what it was designed to do. If your family is clean, you have nothing to fear." Cyrus turned from the fireplace. He looked at Harry for a long time, searching for something, testing the words against whatever internal measure he used to judge sincerity. "I'll resign the committees," he said. "Tomorrow. Publicly. On the condition that you meet with me weekly to discuss the progress of the dissolution and its impact on the neutral families. I want transparency, Potter. Not favors, information. Done." Cyrus moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. You should know that Lucius Malfoy contacted me last night. He's building a coalition, calling it the Heritage Alliance. Every targeted family, plus several neutral ones he's pressuring to join. He's retained Jasper Selwyn as legal counsel, that's old Selwyn's grandson, trained in both British and international magical law. And he's already sent envoys to the French, German, and Scandinavian ministries. I expected that. He's also sent a private message to the International Confederation of Wizards, requesting emergency intervention. He's framing the dissolution as a coup, one man using unchecked power to disenfranchise a quarter of the population. And here's what you need to understand, Potter, he's not entirely wrong." Cyrus held up a hand before Harry could respond. "You had the right. The charter gives you the right. But rights and optics are different things, and in international politics, optics win. Let me worry about the optics. I intend to. But I thought you should know what's coming." He opened the door. "I'll send the committee resignation letters this afternoon. Tell your friend Miss Granger she can expect clear passage for her financial reform proposals by the end of the week." He left. Harry heard the front door close, and a moment later, the crack of apparition. Hermione appeared in the drawing room doorway. Well? He's resigning his committees. And Malfoy's moving faster than we thought. Heritage Alliance. That's what he's calling it. Legal challenges, international pressure, the full package. Hermione's expression didn't change. She'd expected this, they'd war-gamed it the night before. Then we stick to the plan. Let Malfoy build his alliance. The more families he rallies under one banner, the easier it is to track their movements and counter their arguments in a single stroke. Hermione. Yes. Astoria Greengrass. The blood curse. Is there anything we can do? She looked at him with an expression that was half exasperation and half affection. I've already started researching it. There's a healer at St. Mungo's, Hippocrates Smethwick, who's been quietly studying blood curses for years. If the Greengrass wards do fail, there may be alternative treatments. Muggle-integrated approaches that the old St. Mungo's board blocked. The board that Malfoy controlled. The very same. She paused. It's ironic, isn't it? The system that the purebloods built to protect themselves is the same system that prevented them from getting the help they needed. Their own bigotry locked them in a cage. Save the irony for the history books. Right now I need you at the ministry. Kingsley's cabinet meeting is at 9, and I want you there as my legal representative. You're not going. I've got somewhere else to be. Malfoy Manor's wards were dying. Harry felt them as he apparat to the edge of the property, weak, intermittent, like a heartbeat skipping beats. The massive iron gates stood closed, but the magic that had once made them impenetrable was guttering. The peacocks that normally strutted the front lawn were huddled near the house, disturbed by the magical disruption. He hadn't come to gloat. He'd come because there was something he needed to do, and putting it off would only make it harder. The gates opened when he touched them. The old Malfoy wards, in their diminished state, couldn't distinguish between threat and visitor anymore, they just let everything through. Harry walked up the long gravel drive, past the yew hedges and the ornamental gardens, toward the front door of the manor. Draco Malfoy was sitting on the front steps. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled shirt with the sleeves pushed up. He was holding his family ring in his palm, not on his finger, in his palm, turning it over and over. The ring was cracked, the emerald dark, the platinum laced with gold fractures. He looked up when Harry approached, and his expression went through a rapid sequence, surprise, anger, fear, and then something that settled into an exhausted blankness. Come to admire your work? Draco said. No. Then what? Come to arrest us? Evict us? The wards dropped to half-strength at 3 in the morning. Mother's been reinforcing them with personal magic, but she's running out. Father's at the ministry, filing injunctions. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Filing injunctions. Against magic. That's where we are now. Harry stopped at the bottom of the steps. Can I sit? Draco stared at him. Then he moved over slightly, not an invitation, just the absence of a refusal. Harry sat on the stone steps of Malfoy Manor, 2 feet from the boy who'd been his rival for 7 years, and neither of them said anything for a moment. The morning was grey and cool, and somewhere in the gardens, a peacock screamed. Why are you here, Potter? Because I wanted to talk to you. Not your father. You. About what? My feelings. My emotional journey. You've destroyed my family's legacy, dissolved our titles, collapsed our wards, frozen our vaults, and turned us into the most hated name in a country that already hated us. What could you possibly want to discuss? Whether you think I'm wrong. Draco's head snapped around. He stared at Harry, searching for the trick, the mockery, the angle. Does it matter what I think? Probably not, in terms of outcomes. The magic's already moving and nothing either of us says is going to change that. But it matters to me. You were there, Draco. You were in the middle of it. Your family was in deeper than almost anyone. And in the end, you didn't kill Dumbledore. You didn't identify me at the manor. You made choices. Bad ones and less bad ones, but you made them. How generous of you to acknowledge that. I'm not being generous. I'm asking you a question. All of this, the titles, the seats, the wards, the vaults, all of it came from oaths your ancestors swore 1,000 years ago. Oaths to serve the magical world honorably. To oppose dark magic. To protect the community. Harry turned to look at him fully. Did your family keep those oaths? Draco's jaw worked. He looked down at the cracked ring in his hand. No, he said. The word came out quiet, stripped of defiance. No, we didn't. I know that doesn't make this easier. It doesn't make it anything. Knowing you're wrong doesn't make losing everything hurt less. My mother hasn't slept. She's been walking the halls all night reinforcing wards by hand, wards that have been self-sustaining for 400 years. She keeps calling them the family's magic, like they're alive, like they're dying. He closed his fist around the ring. She's not wrong. They are dying. I can feel it. Harry thought about what to say. The strategic part of his mind, the part that Hermione had trained and Daphne was sharpening, told him to stay detached, stay focused, don't get pulled into sympathy for the Malfoys. But another part of him, the part that remembered a scared boy in a bathroom crying to a ghost, the part that remembered lowering his own wand when he could have cursed Draco on the astronomy tower, that part won. Your family will still exist, Harry said. You'll still be Draco Malfoy. You'll still have your magic, your education, your skills. The dissolution doesn't take those things. It takes the inherited privilege. The political power. The wealth that was built on broken promises. And the wards that keep my mother safe in her own home. The wards that also kept Hermione Granger trapped in your cellar while your aunt carved a slur into her arm. Draco flinched. Actually flinched, a full-body recoil like Harry had hit him. The silence stretched. In the distance, a peacock cried again. I heard her screaming, Draco said. His voice was barely audible. That night. I was upstairs. I heard her screaming and I didn't do anything. I just stood there. He looked at the ring in his hand. You want to know if you're wrong? No. You're not wrong. But that doesn't mean this isn't devastating. Both things are true. Harry nodded. Both things are true. He stood. The conversation was over, not resolved, not comfortable, but honest. That was more than he'd expected. Draco. For what it's worth, the dissolution isn't permanent for individuals. Only for the family structures. If you want to build something new, under your own name, with your own work, without the weight of what your parents did, there'll be room for that. Is that supposed to be a comfort? It's supposed to be the truth. Harry walked back down the drive, and Draco didn't call after him, and the gates closed behind him with a sound like a sigh. The emergency Wisengamot session was a war zone. Harry arrived at the ministry just before noon. Hermione had been at the cabinet meeting all morning and met him outside the chamber doors with a briefing delivered in rapid-fire whispers as they walked. Kingsley's under enormous pressure. The targeted families have filed 17 separate legal challenges, most of them frivolous, but they're clogging the system. The International Confederation has formally requested an explanation from the British ministry. The French delegate called it deeply concerning. The German delegate used the word Übergriff, overreach. Malfoy's Heritage Alliance already has 31 signatories. 31. He named 28 families. 3 neutral families joined voluntarily. The Burkes, the Flints, and the Rowells, the last being a targeted family whose matriarch, Millicent Rowell, is acting as the alliance's public face. What about our side? Neville's been talking to the press all morning. Augusta's been working the old guard network. So far we have firm public support from the Longbottoms, the Bones estate. Susan Bones made a statement on behalf of her late aunt's legacy, the Abbotts, and the Macmillans. The Weasleys have issued a family statement of support, though they're not a charter family, so it's moral rather than legal weight. And the public? Split. The prophets running dueling editorials, one calling you a hero, one calling you a tyrant. The Quibbler published a special edition with the headline Potter uses rings to fight invisible Snorkack conspiracy, which I think is Luna's version of support. Harry almost laughed. Almost. Right. Let's go in. The chamber was packed, standing room only, with press crammed into every available gallery and aurors lining the walls. The atmosphere was toxic. Harry felt at the moment he walked through the doors, a wall of hostility from the targeted families section, a mix of support and anxiety from the rest of the chamber, and a pervasive undercurrent of fear that had nothing to do with Harry and everything to do with the fact that the magical world's operating system was being rewritten in real time. He took his seats, the 3 founding chairs that rose from the stone at his approach, and scanned the room. Neville was in place, Augusta beside him. Daphne Greengrass sat near the back, her expression carefully blank. The press gallery was a forest of quick quotes quills. And there, across the chamber, Lucius Malfoy. He looked different from yesterday. More composed. More dangerous. He'd recovered from the shock and transformed it into something tactical. Beside him sat a man Harry hadn't seen before, young, sharp-featured, with the alert eyes of a litigator. Jasper Selwyn, presumably. The Heritage Alliance's legal counsel. Kingsley called the session to order, and Lucius immediately rose. Minister Shacklebolt, I request the floor on behalf of the Heritage Alliance. Kingsley's expression was granite. The floor recognizes Lord, he caught himself. The dissolution had stripped Malfoy's title. The floor recognizes Mr. Malfoy. The correction landed like a slap. Harry saw Lucius absorb it, a micro-flinch, there and gone, and file it away. Ammunition for later, in the narrative of persecution he was building. Minister, fellow members. Lucius's voice filled the chamber, smooth and practiced. What occurred in this room yesterday was an act without precedent in the modern history of wizarding Britain. Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor, a title claimed less than a week ago, invoked an ancient clause to strip 28 families of their hereditary rights, their property protections, and their political standing. He did this without trial, without vote, without due process of any kind. He paused for effect. He was good at this. Harry had to give him that. The Heritage Alliance does not dispute the existence of Clause 17. We do not dispute the Charter's magical authority. What we dispute is the application. Lord Potter acted alone. He served as accuser, judge, and executioner in a single moment. No evidence was presented for review. No defense was permitted. No appeal was offered. A murmur of agreement from sections of the chamber. Furthermore, Lucius continued, the consequences of this action are already proving catastrophic. 12 ancestral estates have lost their ward protections, exposing magical properties to Muggle detection. Financial markets are in turmoil. Our international relationships are strained. Citizens of Wizarding Britain, many of whom were never charged with any crime, are waking up to find their homes unprotected, their vaults sealed, and their names stripped of the legal standing they have held for centuries. He turned to face Harry directly. Lord Potter. You fought a war to protect this world. We all acknowledge that. But protection and dictatorship are not the same thing. What you have done is not justice. It is tyranny dressed in the language of the founders. He sat. The chamber buzzed. Harry rose from the Gryffindor chair. The rings pulsed, and the room quieted, not out of respect, but because the Charter magic made his voice carry a weight that was hard to talk over. Mr. Malfoy raises the question of due process, Harry said. Let's talk about due process. When Voldemort returned in 1995, the ministry, this body, spent a full year denying it. Due process. When Death Eaters infiltrated the ministry in 1997, they used the existing legal system to persecute Muggleborns. Due process. When Dolores Umbridge sent Dementors after Muggleborn children and put them through show trials in this very room, that was due process. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. The system Mr. Malfoy is asking me to defer to is the same system that allowed him to buy his way out of Azkaban after the First War. The same system that sealed his acquittal records last month so that the public couldn't see which of his friends voted to let him walk free. The same system that tabled a Muggleborn rights proposal 2 weeks ago because the committee chair, an appointee of a family now named in the dissolution, decided the timing wasn't right. He let that sit. Clause 17 doesn't bypass due process. It is due process, the original due process, written into the foundation of this body 1,000 years before any of us were born. The oaths were sworn freely. They were broken deliberately. The magic has confirmed every single violation. This isn't my opinion. It's magical fact, verified by the charter itself, through rings that predate this institution. He turned to address the full chamber. I did not take pleasure in this. I did not do it for revenge. I did it because the alternative was watching the same families that enabled Voldemort rebuild their power structures, retake their committee chairs, and spend the next 20 years making sure that nothing changes. I did it because if we don't fix the foundation, the building falls down eventually, and next time, more people die. He sat. Jasper Selwyn stood immediately. Lord Potter, with respect, you can drop the with respect. Say what you came to say. Selwyn's composure flickered. He was used to the rhythms of polite political combat, and Harry wasn't playing by those rules. Lord Potter. The Heritage Alliance has filed a formal petition with the International Confederation of Wizards, requesting emergency intervention. The petition argues that the unilateral invocation of Clause 17 by a single individual, without institutional oversight or review, constitutes an abuse of power that threatens the sovereignty and stability of the British magical community. We have received preliminary support from the French, German, and Scandinavian delegations. How preliminary? Sufficiently preliminary that the ICW has agreed to send an observer delegation to Britain within the week. Their mandate will be to assess whether the dissolution constitutes a violation of the International Statute of Magical Governance, which guarantees all magical citizens the right to property, legal standing, and political representation. Hermione was on her feet before Selwyn finished. The international statute explicitly exempts domestic constitutional mechanisms from ICW oversight. Article 12, subsection C. No provision of this statute shall be construed to override the internal constitutional framework of a member state, including founding documents and charter magic. Clause 17 is a constitutional mechanism. The ICW has no jurisdiction. A debatable interpretation, Selwyn said. An explicit one. I can read you the original French text if you prefer. The Alliance's position is that it doesn't like the Constitution it swore to uphold. That's not a legal argument. It's a tantrum. The chamber erupted. Shouts from the Heritage Alliance section, sharp laughter from Neville's corner, a rising tide of voices that Kingsley struggled to contain. Harry watched the chaos and felt something crystallize. This was going to be a long fight. Not days. Weeks, maybe months. Legal battles, political maneuvering, international pressure. Lucius Malfoy was not going to surrender, and the Heritage Alliance was not going to dissolve just because the charter said it should. That was fine. Harry hadn't expected surrender. He'd expected war. He caught Daphne's eye across the chamber. She was watching him with that unreadable expression, but as their eyes met, she gave him the faintest nod. Then she glanced to her left, toward a side exit, and back at him. Later, the nod said, "We need to talk." The session ground on for another 3 hours, motions filed, objections raised, procedural arguments that made Harry's teeth ache. By the time Kingsley finally adjourned, it was late afternoon and Harry felt like he'd been beaten with a very boring stick. He found Daphne in the corridor outside the Department of Mysteries, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. "Your friend Granger is impressive," Daphne said. "She ate Selwyn alive on the international law question. He'll be better prepared next time, but today she made him look like a student. Hermione tends to have that effect. Malfoy's not going to fight this in the Wizengamot. You know that, right? Today was theater, for the press, for the ICW, for the narrative. His real play is happening somewhere else." "Where?" Daphne pushed off the wall and started walking. Harry followed. She led him deeper into the corridor, past the entrance to the Department of Mysteries, to a dead-end alcove where the torches had burned out and the shadows were thick. "My father told me something this morning, after your meeting. He said Lucius visited him 2 days ago, before the Wizengamot session, before you even invoked the clause. Lucius already knew something was coming. He didn't know the details, but he'd been preparing contingencies." "What kind of contingencies?" "The kind that involve very old, very dark magic." She lowered her voice. "There's a ritual. Pre-charter, older than the founding oaths themselves. It's called the right of primordial claim. It doesn't challenge the charter's authority, it goes around it. The theory is that if a magical compact predates the charter, it can supersede the charter's effects. Like appealing to a higher court. And this right would, what, undo the dissolution? Not exactly. It would create a competing magical claim, an alternative framework that the affected families could anchor their rights to, bypassing the charter entirely. Think of it as building a new foundation under the building you just condemned. Does it work? It's never been attempted. The rite requires several things: a gathering of at least 13 lords, or former lords, from the affected families. A location of primordial magical significance. And, she hesitated. A blood sacrifice. Not lethal, but substantial. Enough combined magical blood to power a compact that rivals a 1,000-year-old charter. Harry's stomach tightened. "Where did you hear this?" "My family's library. The Greengrasses have been collectors of esoteric magical knowledge for centuries. It's how we stayed relevant without ever picking a side. I found references to the rite in a 14th-century grimoire that my great-great-grandmother acquired from a dealer in Prague." She pulled a folded piece of parchment from her robe. "I copied the relevant passages. Your friend Granger will want to see them." Harry took the parchment. "Why tell me this? If the rite works, it saves your family too. The Greengrass wards stay up. Astoria stays safe. Because the rite doesn't save anyone. It creates a new magical compact that's controlled by whoever performs it. And right now, the person organizing it is Lucius Malfoy." She met his eyes. "If Malfoy establishes a new magical framework for pure-blood authority, one that he controls, without the charter's safeguards, what do you think he does with it? He becomes the new foundation. Every family that anchors to his compact owes him. Not gratitude, magical obligation. He'd have a network of oath-bound families with himself at the center. He'd be building exactly what Voldemort built. Without the snake face and the murder. Just power." "Exactly." Harry unfolded the parchment and scanned it. The text was dense, archaic, and his Latin wasn't good enough to parse the details. But the general structure was clear enough: a gathering, a place of power, a blood offering, a spoken compact. "When?" he asked. How soon could he attempt this? The rite requires a location of primordial magical significance. There aren't many in Britain. Stonehenge is one, but it's too public and too heavily warded by the Ministry. The Forbidden Forest has several nexus points, but Hogwarts would interfere. The most likely location is the Chamber of Ley Lines beneath the Department of Mysteries. He'd have to break into the Ministry. Or have allies who could get him access. And he has at least 3 former Department of Mysteries employees in the Heritage Alliance. She paused. My best estimate is that he'll attempt it within the week. He needs to move before the dissolution fully propagates. Once the family magics are completely severed, there won't be enough residual power to fuel the rite. Harry folded the parchment and put it in his pocket. I need to get this to Hermione. Obviously. And I need you to keep watching. If Malfoy makes a move, any meeting, any unusual gathering, I need to know immediately. I will. But Potter, she caught his sleeve as he turned to go. Be careful with this. The rite is old magic. Dangerous magic. If you try to stop it by force and it's already been initiated, the magical backlash could be catastrophic. We're talking about primordial forces, the raw magical substrate that the charter was built on top of. You don't fight that with hexes. Then what do you fight it with? Authority. The same authority you used to invoke the dissolution. The rings aren't just legal instruments, they're keys to the magical infrastructure of Britain. If Malfoy tries to build a new foundation, you can use the rings to reinforce the old one. But you'd have to be there. Physically present. Close enough to the rite to counteract it. So I'd have to walk into whatever trap he's setting. Yes. Fine. He started walking. I've walked into traps before. That night, the first assassination attempt came. Harry was in the study at Grimmauld Place, reviewing Daphne's parchment with Hermione, when the wards shrieked. Not the distant tremors of other families' protections failing, the full-throated scream of Number 12's own defenses detecting a hostile presence. He was on his feet with his wand in his hand before the sound fully registered. Hermione was a heartbeat behind him. They moved to the front hall and found Creature already there, vibrating with fury, his bat-like ears flat against his skull. 3 wizards, Creature hissed. In the street. They are trying to breach the wards. Harry felt the assault through the black ring, a coordinated magical attack, 3 wands working in concert against the house's protections. They were good. Professional. The kind of ward-breaking that spoke of training and practice, not desperation. Stay inside, Harry told Hermione. Absolutely not. Hermione, I said absolutely not. He didn't have time to argue. He opened the front door and stepped onto the threshold of Number 12 Grimmauld Place. The street was dark, the Muggle streetlights had been extinguished, probably by a targeted spell. 3 figures stood in a loose triangle formation on the pavement, wands raised, pouring coordinated magic at the house's wards. They wore dark robes with hoods up, faces hidden, and their spellwork was precise and silent. Harry raised his right hand, the one with 3 rings, and the wards of Grimmauld Place roared. The Black family protections were old, deep, and vicious. Generations of paranoid Blacks had layered defense after defense into the property's magical bones, curses, hexes, repulsion wards, detection charms, and at least 2 things that Harry was fairly certain violated the Geneva Convention of Magical Warfare. With the Black Ring active and Harry's will behind it, those protections went from passive to aggressive in a heartbeat. The cobblestones beneath the 3 attackers' feet erupted. Not physically, magically. Tendrils of dark, silvery energy surged up from the ground, wrapping around ankles, climbing legs, pulling. One of the attackers screamed and tried to apparate, the anti-disapparition ward caught him mid-twist and slammed him back to the ground. The second fired a killing curse at Harry. The Gryffindor ring flared. The green light of the Avada Kedavra hit an invisible barrier 3 feet in front of Harry and shattered, not deflected, not absorbed, but broken apart into harmless sparks of green light that drifted to the ground like fireflies. The ring's magic was ancient, deep, and apparently had opinions about unforgivable curses. Harry didn't give them a chance to regroup. He raised his wand, not because he needed it, but because the wand focused his intent, and let the combined power of 3 lordship rings flow through it. Expelliarmus. The spell that left his wand was not the modest red spark he'd cast 1,000 times in practice. It was a wave, a concussive blast of magic that crossed the distance to the 3 attackers in an instant and hit them like a physical wall. Wands flew from hands. Hoods blew back. Bodies lifted off the ground and slammed into the iron railing of the house across the street with enough force to dent the metal. Silence. The three attackers lay in a heap on the pavement, disarmed, dazed, their dark robes tangled around them. Harry descended the front steps and crossed the street, his wand steady, the rings blazing on his hand. Hermione was right behind him, her own wand covering the fallen figures. Harry pulled back the nearest hood. The face underneath was unfamiliar, a man in his 30s, heavy-jawed, with a tattoo on his neck that Harry recognized from Hermione's files. The mark of the Rowell family's private security force. Hired muscle. He checked the other two. Same tattoos. Professional ward breakers, employed by the Rowell family. Or, more likely, deployed by the Heritage Alliance through the Rowell family's resources. Harry. Hermione's voice was tight. She was looking at the second attacker's wand arm. On the inside of his forearm, faded but still visible, was the dark mark. Former Death Eater. Probably one of the minor ones who'd escaped prosecution by claiming Imperius. Now working private security for a family that was supposedly fighting for its rights through legal channels. So much for the moral high ground, Harry said. He stunned all three, bound them with conjured ropes, and sent a Patronus to the Auror office. Then he went back inside. Hermione closed the door behind them and leaned against it, breathing hard. A killing curse, she said. They used a killing curse. And the ring stopped it. Harry, no one stops a killing curse. That's, by definition, that's what makes it unforgivable. It can't be blocked. The Gryffindor ring disagrees. He looked at his hand. The red gold ring was warm, pulsing gently, and he could feel something through it, satisfaction, maybe, or just the steady hum of magic that had been designed to protect its bearer against exactly this kind of threat. The founders built these rings to protect the holders of the charter. I think they anticipated that some people might object to Clause 17. 1,000 years ago, the founders anticipated assassination attempts. The founders watched the Roman Empire fall, Hermione. They weren't naive about what happens when you challenge power structures. She stared at him, processing. Then she laughed, a shaky, relieved laugh. You're impossible. You know that? I've been told. The Aurors arrived 20 minutes later. Harry let them take the attackers, gave a brief statement, and watched them apparate away. The street settled back into quiet darkness. The Muggle streetlights flickered back on. Creature served tea, which struck Harry as deeply British. Ron Fire called at midnight, having heard the news through the Auror network. You're alive, he said. I'm alive. They sent 3 people. Professional ward breakers. Former Death Eaters. And the ring stopped a killing curse. The Gryffindor ring did, yes. A pause. Mate, you know what this means. It means they can't touch you. Not physically. If the rings can stop an unforgivable, it means they'll try harder. Different methods. Less direct. It also means you can walk into anything and come out the other side. That changes the math on the ritual thing Greengrass told you about. I know. So what's the plan? Harry looked at Hermione, who was already writing notes on a fresh piece of parchment, her quill moving so fast the ink could barely keep up. The plan, Harry said, is that when Malfoy makes his move for the Department of Mysteries, we'll be there. And we'll end it. Ron grinned through the green flames. Now that's more like it. 2 days. That was how long it took. Daphne sent word on a Wednesday morning, a Patronus, a silvery fox that materialized in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place and spoke in her voice, tonight. The Chamber of Ley Lines. Midnight. 13 signatories confirmed. Malfoy's leading. Harry assembled his people in the drawing room. Hermione, Ron, Neville. He laid out what they knew, the right of primordial claim, the Chamber of Ley Lines, Malfoy's plan to establish a competing magical compact. If he succeeds, Hermione said, the dissolution becomes contestable. Not reversed, the charter magic is too strong for that, but contested. Two competing frameworks of magical authority. It would be chaos. And Malfoy at the center of the new one, Harry added. With 13 families magically bound to him through the new compact. A ready-made power base. So we stop it, Ron said. Simple. Simple in principle. The Chamber of Ley Lines is deep inside the Department of Mysteries. Security is tight, and Malfoy has allies inside the department who can get him access. We need to get in without alerting anyone, reach the chamber before the rite is complete, and shut it down. How? Neville asked. The rings. Harry held up his right hand. Daphne said the only thing that can counter primordial magic is charter authority. The rings are the physical embodiment of that authority. If I can get close enough to the rite while it's in progress, I can use the rings to reinforce the charter's claim and collapse the competing compact before it solidifies. And if you can't? Ron asked. Then we do it the old-fashioned way and hex everyone in the room. I like that plan better. You always do. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Hermione researched everything she could find on the Chamber of Ley Lines, its location, its magical properties, its defenses. Ron worked with the DA network to set up perimeter security around the Ministry, in case things went sideways and the magical backlash spilled into the upper levels. Neville quietly arranged for Augusta to be ready with a public statement, in case Harry needed political cover for what was about to happen. Daphne arrived at Grimmauld Place at 10 in the evening, wearing dark robes and an expression of controlled intensity. My father isn't part of it, she said immediately. He refused Malfoy's invitation. 2 other neutral families also refused. But Malfoy has his 13, enough for the rite. Who are they? She listed them. Malfoy, of course. Not Senior Millicent Rowell. Jasper Selwyn. Representatives of the Avery, Carrow, Goyle, Yaxley, and Dolohov families, some of them heads of house, others the most senior surviving members. For more from minor families Harry barely recognized. All former Death Eaters or direct family, Ron muttered. Lovely. The rite requires blood from each participant, Daphne said. Freely given, magically significant. They'll each cut their palms and contribute to a central basin in the chamber. The combined blood powers the compact. Malfoy speaks the words, the ley lines channel the magic, and if it works, a new magical framework crystallizes around the participants. And if it doesn't work? Magical backlash. The ley lines discharge uncontrollably. Everyone in the chamber is at risk. Possibly everyone in the building. How do we get in? Hermione asked. Daphne pulled a small, dark object from her robe, a key, old and iron, with runes carved along its length. My great-grandmother was an unspeakable. She kept a few things when she retired. This opens a maintenance entrance on level 12, below the public areas of the Department of Mysteries. It leads directly to the lower chambers, including the Chamber of Ley Lines. Ron took the key and turned it over in his hands. And you just happen to have this. I happen to come from a family of careful, paranoid collectors who never throw anything away. It's our best quality. Harry took the key from Ron. We go at 11. 1 hour before the rite. Hermione, Ron, and I enter through the maintenance access. Neville, I need you on the main level of the department. If anything goes wrong, you're a relay to the surface. Daphne, I'm coming with you. No. This isn't a request, Potter. I gave you the intelligence. I gave you the key. I know the layout of the lower chambers because my great-grandmother's journals describe them in detail. You need a guide. I need you safe. If something happens to you, if something happens to me, my sister will be just fine, because you'll make sure of it. You gave me your word, and the rings don't let you break promises. She met his eyes with absolute certainty. I'm coming. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. 11 o'clock. Dark robes. No crests. She smiled, thin, sharp, dangerous. Wouldn't dream of it. The ministry was quiet at 11 at night. A skeleton crew of security guards, a few late-working bureaucrats, the occasional cleaning which pushing a mop through empty corridors. Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Daphne entered through the maintenance access on level 12, a narrow, unmarked door in an alley behind the ministry's visitor entrance, hidden behind a dumpster and an extremely aggressive rosebush. Daphne's key turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened onto a steep, spiraling stone staircase that descended into darkness. Cheerful, Ron muttered. They descended in silence, wands lit, the walls pressing close. The staircase went down for what felt like a mile, past the known levels of the ministry, past the Department of Mysteries proper, into regions of the building that Harry hadn't known existed. The air changed as they went deeper, warmer, denser, charged with a magical pressure that made the hairs on Harry's arms stand up. The rings responded to it, pulsing faster, and Harry felt the ley lines before he saw them, vast channels of raw magical energy running through the bedrock beneath London, ancient beyond comprehension, part of the magical substrate that Britain's entire wizarding infrastructure was built on. They reached the bottom of the staircase and emerged into a corridor of rough-hewn stone, lit by crystals embedded in the walls that glowed with a pale blue light. The crystals were natural, Harry realized, not enchanted, just naturally luminescent, drawing energy from the ley lines beneath them. The chamber of ley lines is at the end of this corridor, Daphne whispered. About 200 meters. There will be a set of double doors, bronze, very old. The chamber beyond is circular, with a central basin and 12 pillars. 13 participants, 12 pillars, Hermione murmured. The 13th stands at the basin. That'll be Malfoy. Wait, Ron said. He held up a hand. Listen. They listened. From somewhere ahead, echoing through the stone corridor, came the sound of voices, low, rhythmic, chanting in a language Harry didn't recognize. They've started early, Daphne said, her face tight. It's not midnight yet. Malfoy's not stupid, Harry said. He'd expect us to know about this. Starting early throws off anyone coming to stop him. Then we move. Now. They ran. The corridor stretched ahead of them, the blue crystals blurring into streaks of light. The chanting grew louder, deeper, and Harry felt the ley lines beneath his feet thrumming in response, not agitated, not angry, just responding, the way water responds to a stone dropped into it. Someone was disturbing the deep magic, and the earth was paying attention. They reached the double doors. Bronze, ancient, covered in runes that Harry could feel more than read. The doors were closed but not sealed, Malfoy had left them accessible for his participants. Harry put his hand on the bronze surface and pushed. The chamber of ley lines was vast, a natural cavern expanded by magic into a perfect circle, 50 meters across, with a domed ceiling lost in shadow. 12 pillars of raw crystal stood in a ring around the edge, each one glowing with intense blue-white light, and at the center of the room, a stone basin sat on a raised platform, already half filled with blood. 13 figures stood around the basin. Hoods down, faces visible in the crystal light, Lucius Malfoy at the center, his hands raised, his voice leading the chant. Around him, the 12 other signatories, each with a cut palm dripping blood into the basin, their voices rising and falling in unison. The magic in the room was enormous. Harry felt it like a pressure wave, raw, primordial, older than the Charter, older than the Founders, older than Hogwarts itself. The ley lines were open, channeling power up through the bedrock into the basin, and the blood was catalyzing it, giving it shape and purpose. Lucius saw Harry enter and didn't stop chanting. His grey eyes locked onto Harry's, and his expression was one of absolute, focused triumph. He'd expected this. He'd planned for this. Harry walking through the door was not a disruption, it was a confirmation that the rite was important enough to draw the enemy out. Stop! Harry's voice rang through the chamber, amplified by the rings, cutting through the chant. The crystals on the pillars flickered. Lucius kept chanting. The others kept chanting. The blood in the basin was beginning to glow, deep red, then orange, then gold, as the primordial magic infused it. It's almost complete, Daphne said, her voice strained. Another minute, maybe less. Harry didn't wait. He raised his right hand, 3 rings blazing, and reached through the charter magic for the ley lines themselves. The connection was instant and overwhelming. The charter's authority extended down through the rings, through the magical infrastructure of Britain, into the raw ley line network that everything was built on. Harry felt himself become a conduit, charter magic on one side, primordial magic on the other, and his will in the middle. He pushed. The effect was immediate. The charter's magic surged through the ley lines, reinforcing its claim, asserting its authority. The glow in the basin flickered. The chanting faltered, several of the participants gasped as they felt the pushback, the ancient compact being contested by an even more deeply rooted authority. Keep going. Lucius shouted, breaking his rhythm for the first time. Don't stop. The rite will hold. No, Harry said, and his voice was 3 voices now, his own and 2 echoes that resonated from the Potter and Black rings, layered harmonics that made the air vibrate. It won't. He pushed harder. The rings burned on his hand, actual, physical heat, bordering on pain, and the charter magic blazed through the chamber like golden fire. It hit the basin, the blood, the nascent compact that Malfoy was trying to birth, and it tore through it like sunlight through fog. The blood in the basin went cold. Dark. Dead. The ley lines surged, the primordial magic, denied its purpose, recoiled, and the chamber shook. Crystals cracked. One of the pillars split from base to crown, and a shower of crystal fragments rained across the floor. The participants stumbled, clutching their cut hands, their faces twisted with shock and pain as the magical feedback hit them. 3 of them collapsed outright, minor family representatives whose magical reserves weren't strong enough to absorb the backlash. Others staggered, fell to their knees, clutched at the stone floor as the ley lines discharged around them in arcs of blue-white energy. Lucius Malfoy remained standing. He stood at the basin, his hands braced on its rim, his face white, his eyes blazing. The primordial magic hadn't completed its transformation, but it hadn't fully dissipated either. It clung to him, crackling across his skin in dark red sparks, and Harry could see him trying to hold it, trying to shape it by force of will alone. It doesn't work, Harry said. He walked toward the basin, through the chaos of fallen participants and discharging ley lines, his rings carving a path of golden light through the raw magic. You can't build a new compact. The charter's too deep. It was here first, and it's not going anywhere. The charter is a cage, Lucius snarled. A cage built by 4 idealists 1,000 years ago, and you're too blind to see it. You think you're freeing people. You're just changing the jailer. Maybe. But at least I'm honest about what I am. Harry reached the basin. The dead blood sat in it like ink, inert and cold. It's over, Malfoy. Lucius looked at the basin. At the blood. At his cracked ring. At the 13 faces of his alliance, most of them on the ground, all of them defeated. For a single moment, Harry saw something in Lucius Malfoy's eyes that he'd never seen before, not fear, not anger, not calculation. Grief. The raw, unguarded grief of a man watching the last hope of everything he'd built slip away. Then the mask came back, smooth and perfect, and Lucius straightened. This isn't over, he said. No, Harry agreed. But this part is. Ron and Hermione moved through the chamber, securing wands, checking on the collapsed participants. Neville appeared in the doorway. He'd heard the ley line discharge from the upper levels and come running. Daphne stood near the entrance, her eyes wide, her breath fast, watching Harry with an expression he couldn't entirely read. The Aurors arrived 15 minutes later. Kingsley had been alerted by the ley line disturbance and dispatched a full team. They found 13 former purebloods in a restricted ministry chamber with cut palms, dark magic residue, and no good explanation. Harry let the Aurors do their work. He stood at the edge of the chamber and felt the ley lines settle back into their ancient rhythms, the primordial magic dissipating, the Charter's authority reasserting itself through every crystal and stone. It was done. The rite had failed. Malfoy's last, desperate gambit had broken against the Charter's magic like a wave against a cliff. But as Harry watched Lucius Malfoy being led from the chamber, not in chains, not yet, but flanked by Aurors and stripped of his wand, he saw the older man's eyes, and he knew that Daphne's warning had been right. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. Dawn broke over London, grey and cold, and Harry stood on the roof of Grimmauld Place and watched the city wake up. Muggle London, sprawling and loud and completely oblivious to the fact that a war had been fought beneath its streets a few hours ago. He liked that about Muggles, their ability to sleep through apocalypses. Hermione came up through the roof hatch and stood beside him. The Aurors have all 13 in custody. Kingsley's furious, at them, not at us, for once. Breaking into a restricted ministry chamber and attempting unauthorized ritual magic is enough to hold them indefinitely while the investigation proceeds. Malfoy will have a lawyer there within the hour. Jasper Selwyn was one of the 13. He's in custody too. Malfoy will need a new lawyer. Harry allowed himself a small, grim smile. And the dissolution? Accelerating. The failed rite actually seems to have strengthened the Charter's hold, like the magic took the challenge personally. 16 estates have now lost their wards completely. Vault entailments are dissolving faster than Gringotts can process them. The Malfoy family vault sealed itself at 3:47 this morning. Narcissa and Draco? Still at the manor. The wards are almost gone. By tomorrow, the property will revert to unentailed status, technically ownerless until the ministry processes the transfer. Harry thought about Draco on the front steps, holding a cracked ring. He thought about Narcissa reinforcing wards by hand, pouring her own magic into a dying house. Make sure someone from the ministry contacts them, he said. Not to evict them, to offer transitional housing if they need it. And personal vault access for Narcissa, whatever she brought into the marriage that wasn't Malfoy-entailed. Hermione looked at him. You know people are going to say you're going soft. People can say whatever they want. I'm not going to make homeless refugees out of people who've lost everything. That's not what this is about. She nodded. I'll handle it. They stood on the roof and watched the sunrise, such as it was, a gradual lightening of the grey, the clouds thinning just enough to hint at blue. Below them, the street was empty. The protesters had gone home. The news hadn't broken yet about the failed rite, but it would by afternoon, and then the whole cycle would start again, headlines, debates, accusations, defenses. But for now, in the quiet of early morning, Harry stood with 3 rings on his hand and felt the Charter magic humming through the bones of Britain, steady and deep and old beyond imagining. The dissolution was working. The rite was stopped. The old guard was in custody. And somewhere, in 1,000 homes across the country, people were waking up to a world where the rules had changed, where the names that had held power for a millennium were just names, and the game was starting over. It wasn't finished. Not by a long way. But the foundation was holding. And that was enough, for now. Chapter 4, The Counterstroke. The International Confederation of Wizards sent its delegation on a Tuesday. Harry knew they were coming because Kingsley had fire-called him at 6 in the morning, his voice carrying the particular strain of a man who'd been awake all night fielding owls from foreign governments. 3 delegates, Kingsley said. Madame Delphine Beaumont from France. Hans Krieger from the German Magical Authority. And Eric Lindqvist from the Scandinavian Confederation. They arrive at noon. They've requested a formal audience with you, the Heritage Alliance representatives, and the full Wizengamot. Requested or demanded? The ICW doesn't demand. They request, and then they make your life very difficult if you refuse. Harry was already pulling on his robes. Kreacher had anticipated the occasion and laid out the formal set, the one with all three crests, pressed to razor-sharp creases, the fabric so dark it seemed to exist in a slightly different dimension than the rest of the room. "I'll be there," Harry said. "What's the mood?" "The mood is that 3 senior international officials are flying to London because a teenager used ancient magic to blow up the aristocracy, and then that same teenager stopped a dark ritual under the ministry 3 days ago. Half the international community thinks you're a revolutionary hero. The other half thinks you're a dictator in training. The delegates are here to decide which." "Fair enough. Harry." Kingsley's voice dropped. "These people are not Lucius Malfoy. They can't be outmaneuvered by charter magic or legal technicalities. They represent the collective authority of the international magical world. If they decide that what you've done constitutes a violation of international governance norms, they have real tools to respond. Trade sanctions. Diplomatic isolation. In extreme cases, they can authorize intervention, foreign horrors on British soil. Has that ever happened? Once. In 1782, when the Bulgarian ministry tried to legalize vampire conscription. It didn't end well for Bulgaria. I'm not conscripting vampires, Kingsley. No. You're doing something nobody's ever done before, which is arguably more frightening. Just, be careful. Be thoughtful. Don't give them an excuse." Harry finished dressing and went downstairs. Hermione was already at the kitchen table. She'd essentially moved into Grimmauld Place at this point, commandeering the entire east wall of the kitchen as a research station, and she had a stack of files 6 inches thick beside her plate of untouched toast. "ICW delegation," she said. "I've been preparing since Kingsley's first warning 3 days ago. I have dossiers on all 3 delegates." "Of course you do. Madame Beaumont is the senior member. She's been on the ICW for 22 years. Background in international magical law, trained at the Académie de Magie Juridique in Paris. She's conservative, not politically, but institutionally. She believes in process, precedent, and the supremacy of international frameworks. She'll be the hardest to convince because she'll see the dissolution as a breakdown of institutional norms, regardless of its legal justification." Hermione turned to the next file without pausing for breath. "Hans Krieger is more pragmatic. German magical governance is heavily structured. They have their own version of the Wizengamot called the Zauberat, and it operates on very strict constitutional lines. He'll respect the Charter's authority if we can demonstrate it clearly, but he'll want to see evidence, hard evidence, that the oaths were genuinely broken." "And Lindqvist? The wild card. The Scandinavian Confederation is the most progressive magical government in Europe. They abolished blood status distinctions 50 years ago. Lindqvist personally authored the Confederation's Magical Equality Act. He might actually be sympathetic, but he'll be cautious about endorsing unilateral action by a single individual. So we need to convince a process purist, satisfy an evidence hawk, and win over a sympathetic skeptic." "Essentially, yes." Ron appeared from the living room, where he'd been sleeping on the couch since the assassination attempt. He'd taken the security rotation seriously. There were DA members watching the house around the clock now, and Ron had appointed himself head of Harry's personal detail with a matter-of-factness that didn't invite argument. "Morning," Ron said, pouring coffee. "Who are we fighting today?" "Nobody, hopefully. International delegates. We're trying diplomacy." "Sounds boring." "It will be. That's why you're on perimeter duty." Ron saluted with his coffee mug and went to check the wards. Harry sat down across from Hermione. "What's Malfoy's status?" "Still in custody. Kingsley's holding him on the ritual charges, unauthorized entry into a restricted ministry area and attempted dark magical ritual. His new lawyer, a woman named Cordelia Vance, no relation to Emmeline, filed a habeas corpus motion yesterday. The hearing set for Thursday. He'll make bail. Almost certainly. The ritual charges are serious but not Azkaban level, especially since the rite was interrupted before completion. He'll argue that no actual harm was done. No actual harm. He tried to create a shadow government powered by blood magic. He tried and failed. In legal terms, attempted ritual magic that doesn't produce results is a gray area. The law hasn't caught up to what he actually did. Harry drummed his fingers on the table. What about the other 12? Most of them are cooperating. The minor family representatives are falling over themselves to distance from Malfoy, claiming they were pressured, misled, didn't understand the full implications. The Aurors are sorting the genuine followers from the coerced ones. Not. Silent. Won't talk to anyone. His lawyers filed the same motions as Malfoy's. Rowell. Millicent Rowell is making noise. She gave an interview to the Prophet from her holding cell. They actually let a reporter in, which tells you something about how sympathetic certain ministry officials still are, and she's positioning herself as a political prisoner. Ancient families persecuted for their heritage, that sort of thing. The same ancient family whose private security force tried to kill me with a killing curse last week. She denies any connection to the assassination attempt. The 3 ward breakers have been identified, all former Rowell family employees, all with dark mark connections, but Millicent claims they were acting independently. Harry pushed back from the table. Right. So Malfoy's regrouping from custody, Rowell's winning sympathy in the press, and the ICW is arriving in 6 hours to decide whether I'm a hero or a war criminal. That about sums it up. What happened to the days when my biggest problem was a potions essay? You never did your potions essays. Snape used to dock points from Gryffindor for the quality of your handwriting alone. Fair point. He stood. I need to talk to Daphne before the delegates arrive. She'll know how Malfoy's people are planning to present their case to the ICW. She was here last night, actually. Came by around 11. You'd already gone to bed. What did she want? She left a file. Hermione pulled a sealed envelope from beneath her stack of documents. Said it was urgent and that you should read it before the hearing. Harry took the envelope, broke the greengrass seal, and unfolded the parchment inside. It was a list of names, not the 28 families from the dissolution, but a different set. 12 names, each annotated in Daphne's precise handwriting with dates, locations, and amounts. Financial transactions. Transfers from targeted family vaults to accounts in foreign ministries, the French, the German, the Scandinavian. The annotation beside each entry read the same thing, pre-dissolution transfers. Heritage Alliance payments to foreign officials. Harry read the list twice. Then he handed it to Hermione. She read it and went very still. He's bribing them, she said. Not the delegates themselves. The officials around them, staff, advisors, people who control what information the delegates see before they arrive. Look at the dates. These transfers started the day after I invoked the clause. Before Malfoy was even arrested. He had this plan from the beginning. The ICW intervention wasn't a response to the dissolution, it was part of his strategy from day one. He set up the international pressure before he even attempted the rite. The rite was a backup plan. The real play was always international. Get the ICW to intervene, force a reversal through diplomatic pressure, and use the bribed officials to shape the narrative before the delegates even set foot in Britain. Hermione's face hardened. We need to get this to Kingsley. Not yet. If we show these records to Kingsley, he goes to the ICW with accusations of corruption. The delegates circle the wagons, protect their institutions, and we look like paranoid conspiracists attacking the international community. Then what? We show it to the delegates directly. Privately. Before the hearing. Hermione looked at him. That's a massive gamble. If they're compromised, they're not. Look at the names. The bribes went to staff and advisors, not to Beaumont, Krieger, or Lindqvist. Malfoy didn't try to buy the delegates because he knew they couldn't be bought. He bought the people around them, the ones who filter information, prepare briefings, control access. The delegates are walking in with a version of events that's been curated by Malfoy's money. So we give them the unfiltered version. We give them the truth, and we give them the evidence that someone tried to keep them from hearing it. Hermione sat back. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. That's actually brilliant. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm impressed. There's a difference. She began gathering the financial records into a secure folder. I'll prepare a briefing package. The transaction records, the Heritage Alliance's connections to the bribed officials, and a summary of the dissolution's legal basis. Clean, professional, irrefutable. Have it ready by 11. I want to intercept the delegates before the formal hearing. You're going to ambush 3 senior international officials. I'm going to invite them to coffee and show them some interesting paperwork. It's not an ambush. It's hospitality. Harry intercepted the ICW delegation at the Ministry's International Apparition Point, a secure chamber on level 2, warded and monitored, where foreign officials materialized with the polished efficiency of people who traveled between countries the way most people traveled between rooms. Madame Delphine Beaumont arrived first. She was small, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in the French magical style, structured robes in midnight blue with silver accents, a brooch bearing the ICW's seal at her throat. Her face was the kind of face that had been beautiful once and had traded beauty for authority, which was a better deal. Hans Krieger was her opposite, tall, broad, ruddy-faced, with the build of a man who spent his weekends hiking in the Alps and his weekdays dismantling legal arguments with the same methodical efficiency. He wore simple grey robes and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived 2 wars. Eric Lindqvist was younger than Harry expected, mid-40s, lean, with close-cropped blonde hair and the kind of calm, watchful expression that suggested he was always thinking 2 steps ahead and 3 steps to the side. His robes were light blue, the Scandinavian Confederation's color, and he wore no jewelry, no insignia, nothing that proclaimed status or rank. All 3 of them looked at Harry when he stepped forward, and he felt the weight of their combined assessment. These were not politicians in the British mold, not blowhards or grandstanders or backroom dealers. These were professionals. They'd come to evaluate a situation, and they would do so with precision. Madame Beaumont. Herr Krieger. Mr. Lindqvist. Harry inclined his head. Welcome to Britain. I'm Harry Potter. Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor, Beaumont corrected. Her English was accented but precise. We are aware of your titles. All 3 of them. Her tone was neutral, neither hostile nor warm. I appreciate you making the trip. Before the formal hearing this afternoon, I'd like to offer you a private briefing. There are things you should know that haven't been included in the materials you've received. Beaumont and Krieger exchanged a glance. Lindqvist studied Harry with those calm, evaluating eyes. We have received extensive briefing materials from the Heritage Alliance, Beaumont said. As well as a summary from Minister Shacklebolt's office. Are you suggesting these are incomplete? I'm suggesting they've been curated. By someone with a financial interest in the outcome. That got their attention. Krieger's hand tightened on his briefcase. Beaumont's expression sharpened. That is a serious accusation, Krieger said. His voice was deep and measured. It is. And I have documentation to support it. Lindqvist spoke for the first time. Show us. Harry led them to a conference room on level 2 that Kingsley had arranged, private, warded, with a round table and enough chairs for the 3 delegates, Harry, and Hermione, who was already there with the briefing package arranged in neat folders at each place setting. They sat. Hermione distributed the folders. And for the next hour, Harry and Hermione laid out the case. Not just the financial records, though those were damning enough. The full picture. The charter. The oaths. The violations. The dissolution and its legal basis. The assassination attempt. The failed rite. And running through it all, the thread of Lucius Malfoy's strategy, the carefully orchestrated campaign to use international pressure to reverse a legitimate constitutional mechanism. Hermione was magnificent. She presented the legal framework with surgical precision, citing international precedents, charter law, and the ICW's own governance statutes. She walked the delegates through each family's oath violations, cross-referenced with ministry trial records, Gringotts transaction logs, and testimony from the post-war proceedings. She was thorough without being tedious, passionate without being preachy. Harry spoke when the subject turned to the human dimension, the war, the deaths, the aftermath. He didn't lecture. He told stories. He told them about Fred Weasley dying in a corridor. About Remus and Tonks leaving behind a baby. About Colin Creevey, who was 16 and should have been in class. About Hermione, tortured on a manor floor while the Lord of the House watched. He told them about George sitting behind his shop counter for 2 days with his wand in his hand, waiting for the people who'd cursed his window to come back. And then he told them about the financial records. He laid Daphne's documents on the table, the transfers from Heritage Alliance accounts to foreign ministry officials, the payments to staff members in the delegation's own offices, the systematic campaign to shape the information the delegates received. These transfers began the day after I invoked Clause 17, Harry said. Before the Heritage Alliance was even formally announced. Lucius Malfoy had this contingency prepared in advance. He didn't set up the international pressure in response to the dissolution, he set it up as part of his strategy from the beginning. The rite in the Department of Mysteries was the backup plan. You were the primary. Beaumont picked up the financial documents and studied them, her face unreadable. Krieger leaned over her shoulder, his ruddy complexion darkening. Lindqvist sat back in his chair and said nothing. These transfers, Beaumont said carefully. They do not name any ICW delegate. No. Malfoy didn't try to bribe you directly, he's too smart for that. He bribed the people around you. Staff who prepare your briefings. Advisors who filter your correspondence. Officials who control what information reaches your desk. He didn't need to buy your judgment. He just needed to buy your input. Krieger set down the documents. His jaw was tight. If these records are genuine, they're Gringotts certified, Hermione said. The goblins maintain impeccable transaction records. Every transfer is time-stamped, sourced, and magically authenticated. You can verify them directly with the bank. Beaumont looked at Harry for a long, measuring moment. Then she looked at her colleagues. We will take a recess, she said. 1 hour. We will verify these records independently before the formal hearing. Lord Potter, you and Miss Granger will make yourselves available for further questions. Of course. The delegates stood. Krieger gathered the documents with the careful efficiency of a man who recognized evidence when he saw it. Lindqvist paused at the door. Lord Potter, he said. In the Scandinavian Confederation, we abolished hereditary magical privilege 50 years ago. It was the hardest thing our government ever did. Families that had held power for centuries lost everything overnight. There were protests, legal challenges, threats of civil war. He paused. It was the right thing to do. But I want you to understand that being right does not make it easy, and it does not mean you did it the right way. I know, Harry said. Good. That tells me more than any legal briefing. He left. Harry let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Hermione sank into her chair. That went well, she said. I think. Beaumont's the key. If she verifies the financial records and realizes her own staff's been compromised, her institutional instincts flip from skepticism to fury. Nobody likes being manipulated. And if she decides we fabricated the records, then we have a much bigger problem. But Gringotts authentication is the gold standard, literally. No one fakes goblin records. You should talk to Lindqvist again. Separately. He's sympathetic, but he's holding back. I think he wants to support us but needs a reason that goes beyond legal justification. What kind of reason? A moral one. He's not a lawyer, he's an idealist. He doesn't care about charter clauses. He cares about whether you're doing this because it's right or because it's convenient. Harry thought about that. I'll find him. He found Lindqvist in the ministry atrium, standing beside the rebuilt fountain, watching the water with an expression of thoughtful detachment. The Swedish wizard had an air of quiet self-containment that reminded Harry, oddly, of Dumbledore, not the performative eccentricity, but the deeper quality beneath it. The sense of a man who had seen enough of the world to know its weight. Mr. Lindqvist. Lord Potter. Please, Eric. He smiled faintly. I find that titles create distance, and distance creates misunderstanding. Then call me Harry. Harry. Lindqvist turned from the fountain. Walk with me. They walked through the atrium, slowly, past the flue fireplaces, past the lift entrances, past a group of ministry workers who stared at Harry's rings and whispered to each other. I want to tell you something about the Scandinavian reforms, Lindqvist said. Not the politics, you've heard enough politics today. I want to tell you about a man named Anders Winter. I don't know the name. You wouldn't. He was a minor lord, a low-ranking member of the Confederation's magical aristocracy. When the reforms came, he lost his title, his estate, his family's ancestral protections. He was furious. He organized protests, filed legal challenges, gave speeches. He called the reformers traitors, radicals, destroyers of tradition. What happened to him? He lost. Every challenge failed. Every protest fizzled. The reforms held. And then, about 2 years later, something strange happened. Anders Winter got a job. A real one, not the ceremonial positions that had been handed to him by virtue of his name, but actual employment. He became a magical architect. Turns out he had extraordinary talent for it, talent that had been invisible because he'd never needed to use it. His family's wealth and status had made ambition unnecessary. They reached the far end of the atrium. Lindqvist stopped and turned to Harry. Anders Winter is now the most celebrated magical architect in Scandinavia. He designed the new Confederation headquarters in Stockholm. He's won international awards. And about 5 years ago, he gave an interview in which he said, and I'm quoting from memory, losing my title was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and the best thing that ever happened to me, and it took me a long time to realize those were the same thing. Harry absorbed that. You're saying that dissolution might actually help the people it hurts. I'm saying that systems built on inherited privilege don't just oppress the people at the bottom. They calcify the people at the top. When you tell someone from birth that they're special because of their name, you rob them of the chance to discover what they're special for. Not everyone comes out the other side. Some people break. Yes. Some people break. That's the cost. And the question you need to answer, for yourself, for the ICW, for history, is whether that cost is justified. Is it? Lindqvist regarded him with those calm, evaluating eyes. I believe it is. But that's easy for me to say, I come from a country that already paid the price. The question is whether you believe it, deep down, in the place where belief lives. Because if you do, you'll carry this through. And if you don't, it'll eat you alive. Harry thought about the question seriously. Not strategically, not politically, personally. Did he believe that tearing down the Pureblood power structure was worth the pain it caused? Worth Draco sitting on the steps of a dying manor? Worth Narcissa pouring her magic into collapsing wards. Worth Astoria Greengrass's blood curse destabilizing. I watched people die, Harry said. Good people. Kids. Because a system built on blood purity and inherited privilege created the conditions for a monster to rise. And after he fell, the first time, that system protected the people who'd supported him. Gave them back their seats, their gold, their influence. And they used that influence to make sure nothing changed, which meant that when he came back, the conditions were exactly the same. The same families in power. The same biases in law. The same hierarchy telling Muggleborns they were less than human. He paused. If I leave that system intact, it happens again. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not in 10 years. But it happens again. And next time, the kids who die might be the children of the kids who died this time. So yes. I believe the cost is justified. Not because I enjoy it. Because the alternative is worse. Lindqvist nodded slowly. Then I think you and I understand each other. He extended his hand. Harry shook it. Lindqvist's grip was firm and dry. I cannot speak for Madame Beaumont or her Krieger, Lindqvist said. But I can tell you that the financial records your associate provided are very compelling, and that Madame Beaumont does not react well to discovering she's been managed. I got that impression. Cultivate it. An offended Delphine Beaumont is worth a dozen allies. A ghost of a smile. I will see you at the hearing, Harry. He walked away, and Harry stood in the atrium and felt something settle in his chest, not certainty, because he'd had that since the night he put on the rings, but something quieter. Validation, maybe. The knowledge that someone who'd walked this road before him thought the path was sound. He found Hermione in the conference room, quill in hand, making last-minute adjustments to her hearing notes. Lindqvist? She asked without looking up. He's with us. Not publicly, not yet. But he's with us. 1 down, 2 to go. The hearing starts in an hour. Is everything ready? She set down the quill and looked at him with an expression that combined exhaustion, determination, and a particular kind of scholarly ferocity that he'd learned over the years was Hermione at her most dangerous. Everything is ready. The legal brief is airtight. The evidence is comprehensive. The financial records are verified. Ragnarok sent a certified authentication this morning. If Beaumont and Krieger are honest, and everything in their records says they are, they'll see the truth. And if the Heritage Alliance tries to disrupt the hearing? Malfoy's in custody. Selwyn's in custody. Rowell's in custody. Their remaining representatives don't have the political weight or the legal expertise to mount a serious challenge. The best they can do is make noise. Noise can be dangerous. Not when the other side has facts. Harry allowed himself a small smile. Have I told you lately that you're terrifying? Not today. I was starting to worry. The hearing convened at 3 o'clock in the Wisingamot chamber. Harry had seen the chamber full before, at his disciplinary hearing in 5th year, at the dissolution invocation, but this was different. This wasn't a domestic matter anymore. The ICW's involvement had elevated it to an international event, and the gallery was packed with representatives from a dozen foreign ministries, international press correspondents, and what appeared to be half the magical legal profession of Europe. The 3 ICW delegates sat at a raised table at the front of the chamber, facing the assembly. Beaumont was in the center, Krieger to her left, Lindqvist to her right. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but Harry noticed that Beaumont's jaw was set in a way that suggested the financial records verification had gone exactly as he'd hoped. The Heritage Alliance's remaining representatives sat in a cluster on the left side of the chamber, diminished without Malfoy, Selwyn, and Rowell, but still vocal. Their spokesperson was a witch named Cordelia Vance, the same lawyer Lucius had retained before his arrest, a sharp, angular woman with a voice like cut glass and a talent for making reasonable arguments sound unreasonable in her opponents' mouths. Harry sat in his 3 founding chairs, Hermione beside him at a council table, Neville and Augusta in the Longbottom seats above. Daphne was in the gallery, seated between her father and her sister. Harry caught a glimpse of Astoria Greengrass, a slight, pale girl with dark hair and her sister's sharp features, watching the proceedings with wide, intelligent eyes. She looked fragile in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the curse running through her blood. Beaumont called the hearing to order. This hearing is convened under Article 9 of the International Confederation of Wizards Charter of Oversight, she said. The matter before us is the invocation of Clause 17 of the British Wizengamot Charter of 993 by Lord Harry James Potter-Black-Gryffindor, and the consequent dissolution of dishonored houses affecting 28 British magical families. She paused, and her eyes swept the chamber. The ICW's role is advisory. We are not here to reverse or endorse Lord Potter's actions. We are here to determine whether those actions fall within the legitimate constitutional framework of Wizarding Britain, and whether they raise concerns under international magical governance standards. Both parties will be heard. The delegates will render a joint assessment. She turned to Cordelia Vance. The Heritage Alliance may present its case. Vance stood. She was good, Harry had to give her that. Her presentation was measured, articulate, and strategically framed. She didn't argue that the charter was invalid. She didn't argue that the oaths hadn't been broken. Instead, she made a narrower, more dangerous argument. The issue before this body is not whether the dissolution is legal, Vance said. We acknowledge that Clause 17 exists and that the charter magic has authenticated Lord Potter's invocation. The issue is whether the application of absolute constitutional authority by a single individual, without institutional oversight or review, is compatible with the norms of modern magical governance. She let that hang. Lord Potter is 18 years old. He has no political experience, no legal training, and no democratic mandate. He claimed 3 lordship rings from a bank vault and, within a week, used them to strip 28 families of their hereditary rights. He acted alone. He consulted no legal authority. He sought no Wizengamot approval. He simply walked into this chamber and declared the dissolution, and the charter magic, ancient, inflexible, and utterly indifferent to context, enforced it. Her voice was smooth, measured, devastating in its reasonableness. We do not question the charter's power. We question the wisdom of allowing that power to be wielded without checks, without balance, without the institutional safeguards that every civilized magical society recognizes as essential to just governance. The Heritage Alliance asks the ICW to recommend the establishment of an oversight mechanism, a review body, international in composition, with the authority to evaluate the dissolution's application and, where warranted, to modify its effects. She sat. The chamber hummed. It was a smart argument. Not the blunt, "this is illegal," approach that Lucius would have taken, but something more subtle, an appeal to process, to institutional norms, to the universal discomfort that powerful people feel when someone exercises power outside their control. Beaumont nodded. Lord Potter. Your response. Harry stood. He looked at the 3 delegates, at the packed gallery, at the hundreds of eyes watching him. And he didn't think about legal arguments or strategic positioning or the careful phrases Hermione had helped him prepare. He thought about what was true. Madame Beaumont. Herr Krieger. Mr. Lindqvist. Ms. Vance makes an eloquent argument for institutional oversight. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree with her. Power should be checked. Authority should be reviewed. No single person should be able to reshape a society on their own. He paused. But these are not normal circumstances. They have not been normal circumstances for a very long time. He stepped forward, away from the council table, into the open floor of the chamber. In 1970, a dark wizard named Tom Riddle began building a movement based on blood purity and pureblood supremacy. He recruited from the old families, the same families named in the dissolution. He used their gold, their political connections, their institutional power. He tortured and killed and terrorized for a decade, and when he fell in 1981, those families claimed imperius. Claimed coercion. Claimed ignorance. And the system, this system, these institutions, believed them. Or pretended to. His voice was steady. The rings were quiet on his hand, he wasn't using their amplification. He didn't need it. The old families went back to their seats. Went back to their committees and their charitable boards and their social clubs. They kept their gold and their influence, and they used both to make sure that nothing fundamentally changed. When Hermione Granger, the most brilliant witch of her generation, and a Muggleborn, submitted legislation for basic equality rights last month, it was tabled without a vote by a committee chair appointed by one of the families named in the dissolution. Not defeated. Tabled. Because these families didn't need to fight change. They just needed to smother it. He looked directly at Beaumont. Ms. Vance asks for institutional oversight. She asks for a review body to evaluate the dissolution. But who would sit on that body? Who has the authority, the independence, the distance from the system that created this problem to judge it fairly? The Wizengamot itself is compromised, half its seats were held by the families being dissolved. The ministry is compromised, its bureaucracy is staffed by people who were appointed by those same families. The only institution with the authority to act was the charter itself, through the mechanism the founders built for exactly this purpose. He held up his right hand. 3 rings. Clause 17 is not a loophole. It is not an oversight. It is a safeguard, built into the foundation of Wizarding Britain by the 4 most powerful magical practitioners in history, because they knew what I know. They knew that systems built on inherited privilege will always, eventually, be corrupted by the people who inherit the privilege. They knew that the families they were empowering would, sooner or later, betray the trust placed in them. And they built a mechanism to respond, not through committees or review boards or institutional processes that can be captured and co-opted, but through magic itself. Through oaths that cannot be talked away. Through rings that cannot be corrupted. Through a power that answers to the truth, not to politics. He lowered his hand. I am 18 years old. I have no political experience. I have no legal training. Ms. Vance is right about all of that. But the charter doesn't care about my age or my resume. It cares about the oaths. It cares about whether they were kept or broken. And every single family named in the dissolution broke its oaths. Not arguably. Not technically. Demonstrably. The magic confirmed it. The rings confirmed it. The charter's own ancient enchantments, which predate every institution in this room, evaluated each claim and found it valid. He turned to face the full chamber. I didn't want this power. I didn't seek it out. I went to Gringotts for an inheritance review and discovered that I held the keys to a mechanism that could reshape Wizarding Britain. I could have walked away. I could have put the rings in a vault and let the system grind on. But I watched Lucius Malfoy walk free from a closed trial, acquitted by the votes of his own allies. I watched a Muggleborn rights proposal die in committee. I watched someone throw a killing curse through the window of a joke shop owned by a man who'd lost his twin brother in a war that the Pureblood establishment created. And I decided that the polite approach was over. He sat down. The chamber was silent. Not the hostile silence of the dissolution hearing, a different silence. Heavier. More uncertain. The kind of silence that falls when people are genuinely thinking about what they've heard. Beaumont looked at Krieger. Krieger looked at Lindqvist. Some communication passed between them, not words, just the shorthand of people who'd worked together long enough to read each other's minds. We will recess for deliberation, Beaumont said. 1 hour. The chamber began to empty. Harry stayed in his seat, hands on his knees. Hermione touched his arm. That was, Harry, that was extraordinary. It was the truth. That's all. The truth, delivered with impeccable timing and emotional precision. Don't sell yourself short. She squeezed his arm. I think Beaumont's leaning our way. Did you see her face when you talked about the committee chair tabling my proposal? She recognized it, the same institutional capture she's seen in other countries. And Krieger? Harder to read. He's processing the evidence. He'll want the legal framework to be solid, that's his nature. But the financial records shook him. He doesn't like being manipulated. Nobody does. Neville appeared beside them, having descended from the long-bottom seats. Harry. That was something else. Thanks, Nevada. I mean it. You sounded like, he hesitated. You sounded like someone who should be doing this. Not because of the rings. Because of you. Harry didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Augusta Longbottom materialized behind Neville with the eerie stealth of a woman who'd been navigating political chambers since before Harry's parents were born. Lord Potter. A moment. She drew him aside, her grip on her cane more decorative than functional. Cordelia Vance's argument was cleverer than I expected, Augusta said, her voice low. The oversight mechanism she proposed, a review body with the power to modify the dissolution's effects, would effectively create a channel for the targeted families to claw back their privileges piecemeal. Not reversing the dissolution outright, but hollowing it out from the inside. Death by 1,000 amendments. I know. You need to get ahead of it. If the ICW recommends any form of review mechanism, you must ensure it's one you control, or at minimum, one that's structured to evaluate cases individually, on the merits, rather than reopening the dissolution as a whole. Daphne Greengrass has been advising the same thing. She wants individual evaluation for the neutral families, the ones I didn't name. Augusta's eyebrow rose. The Greengrass girl. She's sharp. Sharper than her father. She is. Be careful with her, Lord Potter. Not because she's dishonest, I believe she's quite honest, in her way, but because her interests and yours will eventually diverge. She's protecting her family. You're reshaping a civilization. Those goals align now. They won't always. I know that too. Augusta studied him with the same piercing assessment she'd been applying to political figures for 60 years. Then she nodded. You'll do, she said, and walked away. The recess lasted 90 minutes, not 60, a bad sign or a good one, depending on temperament. Harry spent the time in the conference room with Hermione, reviewing contingency arguments, while Ron sent updates via enchanted coin from his perimeter position outside the chamber. All quiet out here. Crowds growing. Mostly supportive. Some heritage types, but they're outnumbered. George is selling Dissolution Day commemorative fireworks from a cart. Your face is on them. Harry pocketed the coin and wondered, not for the first time, whether the Weasley twins' entrepreneurial instincts were a force of nature that survived even death. The delegates returned. The chamber refilled. Harry took his seats. Beaumont stood. The delegation has reached a joint assessment, she said. I will read it in full. The chamber went silent. The International Confederation of Wizards acknowledges that the invocation of Clause 17 of the British Wizengamot Charter of 993 by Lord Harry James Potter-Black-Gryffindor falls within the legitimate constitutional framework of Wizarding Britain. The Charter's authority as a founding document is recognized under international magical law, and its self-executing magical mechanisms are beyond the jurisdiction of external bodies, including this one. A murmur swept the chamber. Harry kept his face neutral. However, Beaumont continued, and the murmur died. The delegation notes significant concerns regarding the absence of institutional oversight in the dissolution process. While we acknowledge that the Charter's mechanisms are self-executing and do not require Wizengamot approval, we recommend that the British magical government establish a transparent, independent process for evaluating the dissolution's effects on individual families, particularly those whose oath violations are ambiguous or whose family members were not directly involved in the actions cited. Harry felt Hermione tense beside him. This was the opening Vance had been playing for, the review mechanism. This recommendation is advisory, Beaumont said firmly. It does not constitute a mandate. The delegation does not have the authority to modify or reverse the dissolution, and we do not attempt to do so. We further note, her voice sharpened, and Harry saw something cold flash in her eyes. We further note, with extreme concern, that this delegation has received evidence of financial transfers from Heritage Alliance-affiliated accounts to staff members within the ICW's own administrative structure, apparently intended to influence the information provided to this delegation prior to our arrival. The chamber exploded. Cordelia Vance was on her feet. Madame Beaumont, these allegations are supported by Gringotts certified financial records that we have verified independently through the bank's London office. Beaumont's voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. The delegation takes this matter extremely seriously. We have referred the evidence to the ICW's Internal Review Board for investigation. Any individuals found to have accepted payments in exchange for influencing delegation proceedings will face the full consequences under international magical law. She turned to face the Heritage Alliance section. I will say this plainly, because I believe in plain speaking. This delegation came to Britain prepared to evaluate Lord Potter's actions with skepticism. We were concerned about the precedent of unilateral constitutional action by a single individual. Those concerns remain. But we were also, it appears, the targets of a deliberate campaign to manipulate our assessment, a campaign funded by the same families who claim to be victims of arbitrary authority. Her gaze was withering. The irony is not lost on us. She straightened her notes. The delegation's formal assessment will be filed with the ICW within 7 days. Our preliminary conclusion is that the dissolution is a legitimate exercise of charter authority, that the British magical government should implement a transparent review process for individual cases, and that the Heritage Alliance's attempts to influence this proceeding through financial means constitute a serious breach of international magical governance norms. She looked at Harry. Lord Potter. You have wielded extraordinary power with what appears to be genuine conviction and legitimate legal authority. This delegation does not endorse your methods. We believe that constitutional mechanisms of this magnitude should include institutional safeguards. But we recognize your right, and we respect the moral seriousness with which you have exercised it. She paused. Do not make us regret that assessment. She sat down. The chamber erupted into noise, cheering from Harry's supporters, outraged shouting from the Heritage Alliance section, a frenzy of quill-scratching from the press gallery. Kingsley called for order. Vance was arguing with her remaining clients. Neville had risen from his seat and was applauding, Augusta beside him looking like a cat that had caught a particularly satisfying mouse. Harry sat in the Gryffindor chair and felt something shift, not in the magic, but in the political landscape around him. The ICW had validated the dissolution. Not enthusiastically, not without caveats, but clearly and publicly. The international pressure that Malfoy had spent weeks building had collapsed in an afternoon, undercut by his own corruption. Hermione gripped his arm. Her eyes were bright. We won, she whispered. This round, Harry said. Malfoy's still in custody with a hearing on Thursday. Rowell's still making noise. The review process Beaumont recommended is going to be a battlefield. Yes. But Harry, they validated the charter. Internationally. On the record. That precedent can never be undone. Whatever happens next, the dissolution stands. He let that sink in. The dissolution stands. 28 families, 1,000 years of accumulated privilege, a political system built on blood and inheritance, all of it crumbling, legally, internationally, irrevocably. Across the chamber, Daphne Greengrass caught his eye. She was standing beside her sister, one hand on Astoria's shoulder, and she gave Harry a nod, small, precise, meaningful. The same nod she'd given him in the Wisengamot on the first day, when everything was just beginning. He nodded back. Outside the chamber, the crowd had grown to several hundred. Harry walked through the ministry corridor with Hermione and Ron flanking him, Neville a step behind, and the noise hit them like a wall when they reached the atrium. People pressing forward, hands outstretched, voices calling his name. Flashbulbs from cameras. Quick quotes, quills darting through the air like metallic insects. Lord Potter. Lord Potter, a statement for the prophet, Harry. Over here. The Quibbler would like, Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor, the magical broadcasting network requests. Harry stopped in the middle of the atrium. The crowd quieted, pulling back slightly, sensing that he was going to speak. The rings gleamed on his hand, not blazing, not pulsing, just present. Steady. Real. The ICW has validated the dissolution, he said, and his voice carried through the vast space without magical amplification. The charter holds. The oaths that were broken remain broken. The families that served Voldemort, that enabled him, that profited from his terror, those families have lost the privilege that their ancestors were given in trust and that they betrayed. He paused. But the dissolution is not the end. It's the beginning. We didn't tear down the old system to stand in the rubble. We tore it down to build something better. In the coming weeks, I will be working with Minister Shacklebolt, with the Wizengamot, and with every witch and wizard who wants a seat at the table, regardless of blood status, regardless of background, to establish a new framework for magical governance. One that doesn't depend on who your grandparents were. One that answers to the people, not to the names. He turned and walked toward the flow, and the crowd parted, and the flashbulbs popped, and the quick quotes quills scribbled furiously, and Harry Potter, Lord Potter-Black-Gryffindor, holder of 3 founding seats, the man who had dismantled a millennium of inherited privilege in less than a week, stepped into the green flames and vanished. Grimmauld Place was quiet. Harry sat in the kitchen, alone, at midnight. The house was empty. Hermione had gone to her flat to sleep in an actual bed for the first time in days. Ron was at the burrow. Creature was polishing something in the attic with the obsessive devotion that was his version of stress relief. The ring sat warm on Harry's hand. He could feel the charter magic still working, still propagating, still unraveling the ancient threads of privilege and power. 17 estates had lost their wards completely. 23 family vaults had been unsealed from their entailments, the hereditary locks dissolved, the contents reverting to personal rather than familial ownership. 6 Wizengamot seats had been formally vacated, with more to follow as the clerk's office processed the changes. And somewhere in London, in a ministry holding cell, Lucius Malfoy sat in the dark and planned. Harry knew it. Could feel it, almost, through the remnant of the oath bond that still connected the Malfoy name to the charter, a broken thread, frayed and dead, but not yet fully severed. Lucius was not done. His international gambit had failed. His ritual had failed. His legal challenges were crumbling. But Lucius Malfoy was not the kind of man who accepted defeat. He was the kind of man who transmuted defeat into a different kind of weapon. Harry would deal with that when it came. For now, he sat in the kitchen of Sirius's house, wearing 3 rings that carried the weight of 1,000 years of magical history, and he thought about what came next. Not the political next, the human next. The families losing their homes. The children at Hogwarts learning that their last names had been stripped of meaning. The people caught in between, who weren't villains but weren't innocent either, who were going to wake up tomorrow in a world they didn't recognize. He thought about Draco, holding a cracked ring. He thought about Astoria, thin and pale in the gallery. He thought about Anders Winter, the Scandinavian lord who'd lost everything and built something better. He thought about Fred, who would never build anything again. The kitchen clock ticked. The rain started, as it always seemed to these days, gentle at first, then harder, drumming against the old windows of the old house. Harry finished his tea, washed the cup, set it on the rack. He looked at the 3 rings on his hand, gold, silver, red gold, and he made a decision about what came next. Not the tactical decision, not the strategic one. A deeper one. He was going to build the new world he'd promised. Not just tear down the old one, actually build the new one. And he was going to do it in a way that meant the rings wouldn't be needed anymore. That was the point. That had always been the point. Power used to make itself unnecessary. That was the only kind of power worth having. He turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs to bed, and the rain fell, and the charter magic hummed, and the world kept turning toward morning.